That day was also completely ordinary. The sun was already setting behind the mountains, and as usual the young man heard shouts behind him why he was here to trade and what he had forgotten here. Another day of contempt and persecution for the fact that an orphan with a birthmark was just selling rice cakes on the edge of the trader's road. Not only did he have a disfigured face, but his behavior was disgusting to his parents, and he did not have a young man sitting next to his disfigured shop. They shouted at him that because of people like him other traders do not have a job. They beat him for no reason. He did not have an iota of happiness. But suddenly in the distance the young man saw something incredibly beautiful and something golden. He was frightened by the surprise, but curiosity prevailed. The young man was kneeling in tattered clothes next to the golden object, looking intently at it while the sun was already reaching the mountains behind. The young man looked forward with a sad and serious expression, his eyes reflecting off the golden object in front of him. He inquired. He didn't know who had it. It looked flawless and was lying on the ground, slightly tilted to its side, its golden surface glistening in the dim sunlight. Some time past the moon had clearly risen and showed off its brightness in front of the inhabitants of a small town, but the young man was still curious about what it was and what it was used for. He put the object on the table and looked at it carefully. At first it seemed to him that it was a teapot, but it looked rather uncomfortable. He found it on the road along which many traders travel. Most of all, one of them lost it and didn't even notice it and drove on. But suddenly he realized that there was no difference since he could sell it and earn some money for himself, so he decided to wipe it with a white handkerchief to begin with. Suddenly something started happening to him with this object. He started shaking. The guy didn't understand what was happening, so he even got a little scared because the surprise caught him, to be honest, by surprise. White smoke burst out with the speed of time. The boy was scared for no reason. It was like a scene from some mythical fairy tale. The smoke took over the entire room. Suddenly some unknown shadow that appeared in the smoke spoke in a low voice and even moved. In front of the young man, he was purple in color. His eyes shone with a blue glow and seemed to be looking into the soul of his interlocutor. But the boy did not understand that it was a genie. He thought that a monster was in front of him. He shouted and could not look away from this monster. But the genie immediately made it clear that he was not a monster, but rather the well-known genie from the golden lamp. The genie asked his master what his name was, and he was confused and answered that his name was Kwok Jong. The young man still could not believe that he single-handedly freed the genie from the lamp. Jean laughed and said that he has a good name. The boy, not moving away from the shock, asked if Jean really called him his master. Jean confirmed that he was indeed his master because he freed him from the lamp by giving him freedom. He announced that now he can grant 3 of the boy's wishes. No matter how shocked, a smile immediately appeared on his face. He even decided to ask his Jean if it was true or if he thought he said it. The guy once again asked about his wishes for confidence, and Jean in turn displeasedly confirmed this by turning his head to the side again. Having said this with sarcasm and displeasure, he waited for an answer from the young man, and he in turn thought that Jean was mocking him. With a tired face, the boy finally decided to ask if there were any wishes that Jean could not fulfill. Waiting for an answer, he stood in front of him and looked from under his forehead. Soon the Jin's eyes turned red like sapphires shining in the sun of a clear day. Anger overtook him faster than he himself could have expected. He was angry and waved his hands, asserting that nothing is impossible for such a majestic creation as him. But he warned the guy that the previous owners abused the lamp, so some restrictions appeared. Jean immediately began to explain, and the first thing was that it is impossible to increase the number of wishes. The second wishes are related to life. He could not fulfill them, but the guy did not really understand the point about life, so he asked to tell. He began to explain that murder, birth, creation, or resurrection were of course impossible. Each of these processes has its own specific conditions and limitations that make them unrealistic in certain contexts. And finally, desires related to the will of a person were also forbidden. That is, the manipulation of a person's consciousness was considered unacceptable. Kwok Jong thought to himself that if he could grant any wish, he would not be a genie but a god unless he was sitting in some kind of lamp. But the boy was not going to be sad because it meant that any wish would be fulfilled as long as it was within the limits, but he still could not understand what he wanted. Propping his head with his fingers, Kwok Yung couldn't decide what he needed most at this moment, so he lowered his head and looked at the floor and thought about it. Then the young man caught the eye of a book lying on the table. It was a book about strong and skillful Murim warriors. The boy remembered how everyone beat him and humiliated him for nothing, what tortures he had to go through day after day, and he had a very interesting thought. What if Kwok Yung could have the same great fighting power as a martial artist? He decided that this was exactly what he needed, so he decided to ask his genie if he could make him a Murim master. Here he was already doubting whether it would be difficult for him, but Genie interrupted him with his laughter and confirmed that of course he could fulfill such a simple wish. Kwok Yung was so happy that he couldn't believe his ears, so he couldn't stop himself from asking Jean the same thing. Jean, with a smile on his face, spread his arms in different directions and confirmed that he could fulfill such a wish without any problems. Suddenly white smoke exploded again, so he did not understand what had happened. Kwok Yung was confused because he didn't even have time to understand where his Jean went, because after the white smoke the room became empty again, so he was left alone again, and there was a golden lamp on the table. Suddenly white smoke appeared again, scaring the boy. Jean appeared again, and said that he would not be able to fulfill his wish. The young man seemed to be upset, and as if angry he began to shout at him that he disappeared and now returned and says that he cannot fulfill his wish, which fits all the points that Jean announced earlier. Jean checked out a place called Murim and came back. He had to know what the boy wanted before he could do what he wanted. He began to explain that Murim is the one he knows that something happened to him. All the warriors they knew became real monsters who became superhuman. Contorting his face, he admitted that this desire was beyond his strength and perhaps he could die for this desire. After explaining this, he calmly spread his hands in different directions. Kwak Yung was stunned by what he heard. He was sorry, but after he saw those people, everything turned in his head. Then he asked him to wait. He needed to put his thoughts in order. The young man shouted for him to stop, then asked him to listen to another wish, and only then he asked if he could really leave so easily. A candle standing on the table on a golden candlestick shed light on the whole room until during the conversation they almost came to an agreement that Kwak Chun needed money. It was not just coins, all silver, gold, silk, jewels, and all these treasures he had to put in a cave on the side of a steep mountain, so that only Kwak Yung knew where they were, and no one else could find them. Jean was pleasantly surprised that this was such a detailed wish, so his eyes lit up even brighter, but the boy decided to immediately add his second wish. Kwak Yung thought that he wanted a healthy body height, 183 strong muscles and bones. Jean, surprised, replied that it was simple. With one movement of his hand, Jean quickly fulfilled his wish, turning an ordinary loser into a real model. The young man could not believe that it was really him. He did not have enough words to describe his admiration. Jean himself was passionate about his work, so he said with a smile that he did not need to thank, but the young man replied that he would not stop thanking. Kwak Yung thought about the last wish. He actually thought about it seriously. Jean was surprised that he so quickly decided to make all three wishes, so he offered to think more about it, but the boy let his words pass his ears. Kwak Jong decided that he wanted to go back in time to the city he wanted, but Jean doubted because no one had dreamed something similar before, so he was not sure about it. The young man asked in surprise if it was really so. Jean confirmed his words because due to the time paradox there can't be two lamps at the same time, so he can't follow him to check if he got it or not, and it's also unknown if the two previous wishes won't affect him in the past. Kwak Yung admitted that he expected it, that there might be some side effects, but he was sure that he wanted to go back in time. He argued that he wanted to live his life anew from the very beginning. He said it with great determination. Jean was very surprised by this, even confused at first because he did not know what words to choose in response. He agreed because he was a genie, so he was obliged to fulfill his master's wishes, so he decided to at least try. After these words, Kwak Yung seemed to fall into a long sleep and found himself in some cave lying on the cold floor and not understanding where he was at all. The young man slowly opened his eyes and then quickly got up because it scared him. He didn't understand a thing. When he finally came to his senses, he was very happy because he finally understood that everything worked, so his joy knew no bounds. Here he realized that something was blinding his eyes very much. He could not understand what was in front of him, so he had to force himself to look at this glow in front of him was his gold. These were incredible treasures that were all his. There were more treasures than in the whole world, and all of them belonged to Kwak Yung alone. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and realized that he had healthy and strong legs, perfect clean skin, and a beautiful body. He could not believe his own eyes that this young man whom he sees in front of him is him, and not someone else. This is what he could only dream about. It even seemed to him that he had become younger than his age, so he could not tear himself away from his reflection. He really could not believe that all his wishes had come true. He was happy because now he could proceed to the implementation of his plans. He saw the sunset where the rays shone through the clouds, illuminating the sky with delicate shades of yellow, purple, and blue colors. It was a small town of Wonkan in Danban province where the locals knew every corner and every neighbor like the back of their hand. Suddenly Kwak Jong heard unfamiliar voices coming from the Munri exchange. With small steps along the old stone road, he began to approach that institution because curiosity took over. It flashed through his mind that he invested all the money he took with him with the exception of a few 30 coins. Now he had to find suitable clothes and start learning martial arts, but plunging deeper and deeper into his thoughts, he did not notice that all the local residents were looking at him with incomprehension. All the people thought that he was from a rich family and that he had an incredible appearance, which was the case, and the owner knew it. He understood that he was truly an incredibly rare beauty, such that one comes across extremely rarely. The attention to him was over the top. But for a moment he remembered how he had been treated by strangers before, about such a treatment, as if he could only dream of an ancient god of beauty. But he emerged from his memories and realized that now the situation has changed drastically, that now with such a face, he could not help but attract the attention of strangers. Even in his silk fabrics, the decision was made that appearance and money are the best things in the world. As he walked, he saw a board on the house with a strange inscription. When he got closer, he realized that something about the soldiers of the holy people was written there. But he only later understood which soldiers it was about, and the young guy who was sweeping the yard near this board of course paid attention to the handsome man who was walking in his direction. The young man covered his mouth with his hand in surprise. He did not even hear the question. Kwok Jong asked if this is where the holy dragon warriors are trained, but he didn't hear anything, so he just looked in his direction again. Without taking his eyes off the beautiful stranger, he asked what business this handsome man had come for. With clear and innocent eyes and a smile on his face, he replied that he had come here to make a request. He watched the chairman's office. It was a traditional building with a wooden door next to a tree, sunlight shining on the roof, creating a warm atmosphere. He observed 5 people in a room where they were standing around a large round table. 1 man was sitting, the rest were standing next to each other in the room. There were scrolls and a stand for them. The conversation began like any other. Saint Dragon Head Jo Hong asked if Kwok Yung really wanted to join them while the conversation was getting serious. Kwok Jong thought that there was no need to immediately give a positive answer to the question, so he decided that he would simply repeat that he just wanted to submit a request. Jo Hong asked him in disbelief what exactly he wanted to do. He wanted to know what kind of martial arts they had and what methods they taught there. He also asked whether it is really possible to hide his identity in secret for personal reasons. But Jo Hong immediately raised a counter-question: why exactly did he need all this training? After a few minutes of misunderstandings, he decided to embellish his story a little, because no one would even want to hear about the real story, because few people believe in the existence of the genie. He could not tell which family he belonged to, but all his ancestors served as high-ranking officials in the imperial palace, so the descendants of the family had to study. This story was about how he ran away from home and was interested in martial arts but not academic knowledge at all. It was a kind of big jar with the stories of the Murim book that was sold in the bazaar. But his eloquence turned out to be much better than he thought, so he asked them with confidence and persistence, hoping that his words would have the desired effect. They admired and sympathized as if they had heard some great story, so they understood everything, grasping the depth of his words and the sincerity of his emotions. Of course, he didn't ask for it empty-handed, so he reached into his pocket for his gold coins. The gold coin shone as if it had just been minted from pure gold. The men looked at him with incomprehension, not knowing what words to choose. Kwok Yung warned that they shouldn't thank him too much when Jo Hong interrupted him. He asked to be treated the same as the others and to allow him to focus only on training. He understood him and promised to make sure that he could concentrate only on training without worries. Throwing in 2 more gold coins, he asked that only the 4 people present here know this story. The old man's eyes became round like the pennies that Kwok Jong threw on his table, and assured him not to doubt his kindness and honesty. He was happy that his new life had begun, so he could not control his emotions. The road awaited him was not an easy one, literally and figuratively, because there were a million steps ahead of him. Contrary to expectations as to why he could learn this complex dragon technique at once, he constantly repeated the basic training. How long he had to do these basic trainings he didn't know yet, but it was already not less than 3 months. A man ahead of him on the stairs called out to him. It was the dragon rider Quan Man Gun. He asked how long he was going to stay there. Kwok Jong thought that he looked very much like a rat with muscles. Laughing, he promised that he would run to him. He couldn't figure out when he would finally start learning martial arts because it was taking so long. So he spent a year just doing basic training. He began to think about quitting everything and start doing something else, but suddenly he heard his name. Quan Man Gun asked him to follow him faster. They reached a large training ground on top of a mountain. It was really huge and surrounded by many trees. He still couldn't understand what Quan Man Gun wanted from him, but based on his posture in which he was standing, it was something serious. Therefore, he came to the conclusion that this is how he would be expelled, and this prompted him to think about the future. A year ago, when his mentor asked him to study Kwok Chong's martial arts, he refused because he grew up in hothouse conditions and such people usually gave up halfway. Kwok Yung really wanted it to be true, but there was always a but. But it wasn't negative, so he praised him. Kwok Yung was very patient and very well behaved. Therefore, from the next day, he officially promised that he would be involved in his training. There was no limit to the joy in Quack Brown. He didn't even try to hide it, so his smile shone all over his face. But he warned that it will be much more difficult than then, so training will also include sparring. With confidence in his eyes, as if he knew the answer in advance, he asked if Kwok Yung was really ready for all this. And so it was. He was definitely ready for this. He had an endless monologue in his head. Finally, he could start studying martial arts. The day will come when he will become a Murim master. A year of full training has passed. On the roof of the village, wooden houses with pitched roofs glistened at night. The soft light of the lamps illuminated the large gate, creating a mysterious mood. Lying on his bed, Kwok Jong realized how much his muscles hurt. He was very happy that he was being taught, but a whole year has passed and Dan Jong's inner strength is not growing. A voice pulled him out of his thoughts, so he opened his eyes with a displeased face. The man entered his room and sat on the edge of his bed. Kwok Yung got up, and the man told him that he would soon have a match and asked how he was feeling about it. But he didn't even move. He answered briefly, and clearly he was not in any mood at that time, especially for a duel. But the man was so surprised that he even asked again. He admitted that he heard the conversation of his teacher about his rival. He said it without much enthusiasm. His rival's name was San Jo Tan. He was taught by the third senior Kwok Jong. He did not understand who it was, so he decided to ask again who it was. He was waiting for details. The man began to go into details. His opponent was from the Valley of Death. He always had a lot of strength for fights. He also added that he used to study in Pungak Academy. He had very broad shoulders and extremely large and fast feet, but Kwok Jong could not understand if there were such people in their academy. But he hurried to calm him down because since it was just sparring, he couldn't just kill him. With sarcasm, he replied that he was very grateful that he cared so much about his safety. But Kwok Yung immediately began to doubt his strength because Danjo is not growing. But he decided that it would be enough to worry about what would happen, so the day of sparring came faster than he could have thought. Kwok Yung realized that he was not feeling very well because his stomach kept hurting. Maybe it was from excitement. But soon he heard a not very pleasant conversation behind the wall. Two men were talking. One was asking the other what was the name of the handsome man with whom he would have to fight. Another could not remember his exact name, so he pronounced the name incorrectly, and then added that he is not handsome at all but looks like a girl. Kwok Jong realized that it was San Jo Tang and his companion from the Lying Dragon. The conversation continued, and he sat quietly lurking alone, saying that he had not seen him and how he fights, so he did not know what skills he had. But since the head and the brothers care so much about him in a special way, didn't that mean that he really knew something? But this information did not amuse his opponent. On the contrary, he became even stricter and angry with him, even without knowing him personally. He was beside himself with anger, so he couldn't even imagine that he could lose. He could make that boy crawl on the ground with one blow. But the door creaked and opened a little, and a voice was heard asking who could make Kwok Chung crawl on the ground with just one blow. In front of them stood Kwok Yung, confident and proud. He decided to offer him to start a duel right now if he was so brave. With a small smile on his face, he got into a fighting stance. He was really ready to fight him just like that on the spot. At first, San Jo Tan did not understand who was standing in front of him and what was happening. But Kwok Jong knew that he would succeed because a year of extensive training should not be wasted. He thought it would be a good idea to check the results of his ordeal in training, so he yelled for him to attack him, or maybe San Jo Tan was scared. That's what he thought at first. But on the contrary, San Jo Tan was very angry, and he did not hide it. San Jo Tan, he must have been so fast that he didn't even understand what happened, but the first thing that came to mind was that he is very fast. But Kwok Jong saw the trajectory of the blows very well, so he could quickly dodge them, knowing that he would succeed. Kwok Jong quickly all over the opponent so that I flew away a few meters from him. But his opponent is a joke of anger in him that the veins on his forehead were visible, so he could not stand this scum. San Jo Tan took the dispersal so that the anger of those who attacked him was over the edge. But Kwok Yung was able to catch his fist very quickly, preventing him from driving across his beautiful face. But the big man could not believe that such a thing was even possible. His surprise was reflected and etched on his face. But Kwok Yung knew what he was capable of, so he only focused more on his opponent and the battle as a whole. Gathering strength and spirit, he hit his opponent with a rush so that he was a few meters away from the battle site. But Kwok Jong wasn't going to stop, so he accelerated and ran to finish off his opponent for sure. Couldn't believe that some guy who looks like a girl could beat him. But the boy wasn't going to stop, so he punched his opponent in the face several more times, knowing that he had all the power. When he was sure that he had finished, the first thought that came to his mind was that he managed to do it. San Jo Tan's fist hurt like hell. That was the first thought that came to his mind before he regained consciousness. Kwok Jong got into courage. He liked what he got, and the efforts that went through his hands were not in vain, so he could not stop. But suddenly the boys heard some other voice that stopped their battle. It was a voice that asked to stop. This is the voice of the head of the dragon, Jo Hong. He came not alone, he came with his guards. They were standing at the door, they and several other people who were shocked by what they saw. But soon he realized that he must have overdone it, but it was already too late. After that incident, of course, the young man ended up in the chief's office, and he had to explain everything he had done. The conversation promised to be long. But instead of moving, the young man, the head, on the contrary, praised him and said that he has real talents for martial arts. But for the boy, it was something higher than praise from the head. It was something incredible. He could not believe what he had just heard. So the chairman confirmed that with his efforts he achieves very good results, but the speed of his learning is much more than the amount of effort he put in. He confirmed again that this is a very unusual but pleasant bonus, that is, it is really a talent. Therefore, the chairman decided to offer him to become his student. These words seemed unreal at that moment. He threw another gold coin on the table and ran out of the office. I don't know what to do. Of course, he agreed that the head of the dragon himself would become his trainer. The coach also did not hide his happiness, so he sat and smiled at him, while the guard behind him was not very happy. Going down the stairs, he kept scrolling through the same words of his current coach. You couldn't believe what he said, that he really has talent. When he went outside, even without realizing it, he realized that he felt joy from the fact that he had become stronger. He never thought in his life that he would ever hear from someone that he had talent. Raising his head to the sky, he smiled and realized that it was all thanks to the genie who gave him all this. If it wasn't for the war, he wouldn't have all this. He realizes that some cloud in the sky looked like Jean, so he thanked him again because he couldn't believe that this was really happening to him. Sometimes he was treated to sparring, which brought him great pleasure because he almost always won. The word victory was the second word of his name. He realized that after the victory over his first opponent, he still had no worthy opponents. He was so engrossed in training that he didn't even notice that he had turned 15. Time for him passed extremely quickly in all these years. He never lost, he became the best among the warriors of the sacred dragon. Then he thought that he had everything, so it was until now one interesting day did not come. It was another ordinary day in the dormitory. He calmly visited their academy without worrying about any little things. Soon he heard a woman's voice calling him. He didn't even understand at first until he turned around. When the young man returned to the girl, he saw a small girl who asked him if he had seen whether the Academy of the Warriors of the Holy Dragon was located here. She looked charming. She had red hair that did not reach her shoulders, and they also had charming clothes that immediately caught the young man's eye. He didn't understand what was going on. He saw this girl for the first time and she was already addressing him. Then he decided to answer that this is not the city where inexperienced children can come. But he did not pay attention to the fact that she wanted to answer something. He wanted to drive her out of here as soon as possible, but the girl was not going to leave so easily. She said that she was not an ignorant child. The girl became very angry and generally began to say how dare he talk to her, as if he was not an educated child. With a smile, he began to make fun of her and confirm that it was she who was saying such unpleasant things. The girl poured more rain on him and then threatened to cut off his tongue. He also noticed that her chi was a little different from the others, but he assured himself that he had nothing to fear because he was the best in the academy. It was nothing compared to him. He began to say that she was the first to start addressing him disparagingly, but she denied because she has a higher status. He could not believe her words. Then he denied that he also has not a small status. Probably all this is a lie, but there was always one but. But how did he even dare to flaunt his status in front of the Bekri family? She decided that he was very arrogant. The young man could not believe that he was speaking to the very member of this family, so he had a bruise on his forehead. There are many influential Kanhasibi families in Murimi. These families held conservative views. They had more respectable people from the San and Jongnam, but the Jong family has Ibis are what they are. And Bekri was one of them, but what she was doing here was completely unclear to the young man. He started muttering something under his breath and smiling nervously, but she couldn't understand what he was saying. She asked him to stop talking nonsense because she was giving him another chance. She asked him to kneel down and apologize to her. He couldn't believe what he heard then. If this girl is looking at him from a height, you can't look at her like that, but he also can't give, and that's why he didn't really want to kneel in front of her. Anger got right under your throat. She started burning as if on fire. She said that she could tear the veins on your legs so that you would no longer be able to walk on them. He asked with a little sarcasm if all the people from her family tear the veins on their legs, but she admitted that this is her personal matter and it has nothing to do with her family. But she confidently continued to insist that if he had not knelt then, he would have regretted it all his life. But the young man realized that he had nothing left but to start fighting with him, so he took a fighting stance. But soon someone hit him on the head, and it was not this girl at all. It was his teacher who appeared soon and started shouting at him what he was doing. But suddenly the girl was called by some other voice that was unfamiliar to no one. Another guy appeared on the horizon. He had blue eyes and the same color hair, which was tied in a high ponytail. He was dressed in very expensive fabrics. He asked what happened and how this girl was feeling. They must have been some kind of relatives. She immediately answered him that nothing special is happening here. It's just an idiot who is not afraid of anything. She was going to give him a lesson. The man with blue hair didn't understand what was happening, so he didn't even try to ask again. But Kwak Yung started shouting that she was not speaking correctly and demanded that she tell the truth. But the coach approaching from behind bowed the young man's head and said that they all together bow their heads before her and her family and ask for forgiveness. But Kwak Yung didn't like that. He bowed his head with a little pleasure under the pressure of the teacher. But well, the man asked them to get up because the children were just brawling, but the head was very grateful to their family and said that he would not forget it until the end of his days. The men passed them by and the young man remained standing on his knees in front of this girl. Passing by, the girl called him a scumbag and passed by with a smile. Kwak Jong thought that there must be a very important message for the members of such a serious family to come here. Surely there will be a martial arts match. It is like a demonstration of one's greatness and a test of other schools and clans. Kwak Jong promised that if this happens, he will definitely take revenge for that humiliation twice as hard. Some time passed when there was an open duel between the School of Sacred Dragon Warriors and the Bekri family. In the fight, as everyone thought the Bekri family won, it was a tall man of 28 years old. When the winner was announced, the audience gave a happy ovation. Bekri family has already won, but the academy has never been the deserved glory of the Bekri family. Even if it was a famous family, they were still of the same age. No one could have expected that the difference would be so great. But if Kwak Yung wins, the atmosphere itself can change drastically, and he knew it very well, so he hoped for the best, and this could happen if he could break Kyung-a Bakery. The girl stood up, attracting the attention of not only her family, but also the audience in the hall, especially the attention of this young man. She asked Jo Hong for a sparring partner because she also wants to fight someone. The man a little nervously replied that of course he could find her a partner for the match. The girl immediately replied that she wanted Kwak Chun as her partner because she wanted to take revenge on him for that act. But Kwak Yung could not understand what she was talking about. With the teacher, nothing was heard. The teacher called Kwak Jong off the stage to come up to them, but even the teacher was pleasantly stunned by these events. With a serious expression on his face, he announced to him that the next match was his. He introduced Jayong Bakery and told Kwak Yung to consider it an honor to duel with such a high-ranking person. Kwak Chong realized that this was his only chance. If he had won that match, then the situation could have changed completely. It was time to check what this brave young man was capable of. Chong went out to the man who called him. He began to mentally prepare himself that he can and should win in general. The man handed him a garment that could block the sharpness of the sword, but at the same time it could not protect against cuts on the skin and bones. The man asked him to be very careful, and if he is not ready to continue, then he should refuse to give up immediately. He questioned him again to make sure that he understood the seriousness of his choice. But the young man was so confident in himself that he was sure that everything would be fine, and there was no need to worry so much about him. When they went to the battlefield, Kwak John noticed that the girl was not holding an ordinary sword in her hands. He was just a wooden young man. He did not understand what was going on. Was she going to fight him with a wooden sword? Did she really want to fight him with a martial artist with fake weapons? But the girl was not jokingly confident in herself, so the young man had to say thank you to her family. If not for them, she could have sent him to the other world to his ancestors. She was sorry, but of course it was ordinary sarcasm, but she warned that the pain of a real sword is short, but the wooden one is stronger and lasted longer. Holding a non-real weapon in her right hand, she added that she was sorry to waste a wooden sword on him. With these words, she made the young man very angry. Because of his anger, he didn't even quite hear what she said, but they were interrupted by a man who asked them to stand as needed for the fight. The man had time to announce the match when a girl with a sword in her hands rushed towards him, and Kwak Jong did not even have time to understand that the match had begun. Not more than a second passed when Kwak Sun was already lying on the floor, and the girl with a smile was standing over him. The man who was watching the fight was shocked by this and speechless. Chong was beside himself with anger. He didn't even have time to react at the beginning of the match, as he was already on the floor of their court. The girl, not hiding her pride, stood over him and said that it was only the beginning. Zhang didn't even have time to fully rise to his feet before she hit him again with her weapon, and he was once again completely on the floor. The young man simply could not believe that such a thing was even possible, because no one could defeat him, and here even the girl was able to make him polish the floor with her face. The girl spun in the air and hit Chong again. She was so fast that it was difficult to notice her in motion. He could not believe that his suffering had taken so many years. The difference was so great, so palpable. After these thoughts, they just started beating him like a sandbag. For training, it happened so fast that he could only feel the places where she could aim her sword. Kwak Yung, formerly known as Invincible Yung, couldn't do anything to her. She was simply invincible. The boy thought that he had grown significantly in terms of martial arts, but in the end he was just an ordinary frog at the bottom of a well. Putting the boy on his knees in front of her and putting the sword on his shoulder, she told him to beg her for mercy. Only then she could spare him. Everyone present was in shock, and especially the students of the entire academy were speechless, so everyone stood in silence, not knowing what to add or what to say. A man with black hair and a bandage on his head. He looked serious and tense. There was a drop of sweat on his face. He was looking forward, as if he was concentrating on the fight field. But Kwak Yung took her sword by the imaginary blade with his hand and threw it off his shoulders. With wounds and sweat on his face, he looked into her eyes and rudely replied that he was not going to give up. This made her very angry, so she directly replied that he was a real bully if he wasn't going to surrender. She, with anger in her eyes, directly wished him dead, knowing what she could do to him. Jian punched Kwak Yung in the face with all the strength she had accumulated under her skin. She was actually ready to kill him. He was brutally shattered. His pride and belief in his personal power shattered like a house of cards, leaving not a trace of them. 10 days have passed since that time. Kwak Yung was lying in his room on the bed and could not understand where he was, but then he understood only that he had lost. But suddenly he heard some rustling outside the door of his room, so he decided to get out of bed. He opened the door and asked if anyone was there. He couldn't see well because his face was beaten so badly. He saw in the corridor in front of his door to the room of that boy, who was then with Sanjotan and his first opponent. The boy wanted to tell him something. He had something to say. He was in a bad mood. That day, Sanjotan's friend brought him a letter from that man. It was written all about the fight 3 years ago, about the dirty things that his teacher was scrolling through. Kwak Yung came to his teacher and decided to ask a few questions. The first thing he asked was if it was true that he paid Sanjotan to play along with him in the battle. Jo Hong was actually scared by this question. It came to him rather unexpectedly too. Suddenly, while drinking his tea, he didn't know what to do and what to answer. The guy admitted that he knew everything. It was quite unpleasant for him to understand. He directly told the teacher that he knew it, and after thinking about it, he would like to find out because of all the battles he had fought in the last 3 years. With understanding in his eyes and with despair in his heart, He realized how stupid he was during all this time. There were many strange cases when he had to win suddenly. He then asked his teacher if he really needed his money that badly, but the teacher immediately nervously began to deny it. He began to say that the boy actually has talent, but it was clear from his eyes that he was nervous. The young man looked disappointedly at his teacher. The teacher continued to say that those words were very difficult to express, but he was actually the best student he had taught in the last decades. The young man realized that the teacher was trying to hold him somehow. Kwok Yung listened to him with a very displeased face. He understood that most of the time the teacher lied to him, but the teacher kept saying that he always took care of him, and he thought that he really wasn't wrong about him. He was still the best student in the history of the school. The teacher kept saying that, but the young man knew that all this was for his money. I'm so nervous. The boy squeezed his pants very hard with the cloth because he couldn't hold back his anger at the teacher, but the teacher began to justify himself that he was speaking absolutely honestly, but the young man didn't hear him then. The boy no longer heard the words of his teacher, who very nervously tried to explain something to him. He did not even want to be there because his greed for money reached the point that he could not endure it anymore. Bowing his head down, the young man answered very sadly that he wanted to leave, so he did not stay in the same room with his teacher for more than a minute. Kwok Yung was sitting on the same bench as Kwang Man. They talked about everything, but at one point the guy decided to ask if he also knew everything. He didn't know what to answer, so he kept silent at first. Then he broke the silence and answered that he also knew everything and then apologized. Kwok Jong decided that he must apologize first to him and then to everyone else, but the man replied that there is no need to apologize to him, but it is necessary to talk to others. Let them not show outwardly, but there are many traumatized among them. The boy decided to ask his mentor if he also knows who his teacher really is. He confirmed that he actually knows better than him, but the young man wondered why he didn't go then. The man admitted that the head wanted to leave the school, but there was a condition that they would give him a share of the profit. The young man was very surprised by these words. The man then admitted that he was thinking of giving it up. But Quan Man, he said that a teacher is a teacher. How could he leave this person who was his mentor and just leave? He said this with a smile and obvious pride. And to make it more interesting, he wanted to enlarge the school, make it better. He even wanted to go beyond the borders of Danbon province. He also admitted that without money and without support, a city where everyone will have the same conditions for education. Then the young men laughed merrily. The young man said that this man was actually a telepen. He also laughed and even confirmed it. Then the smile disappeared from the young man's face. He decided to ask what the man was going to do next. He thought that he would leave this school. When the young man asked the man if he had anywhere to go, he answered that there was. Then he asked if there was anywhere for him to go, but he had not yet decided what he would do next. Meanwhile, the sun was shining like on the best summer day. Then the young man got up and left. When he entered the courtyard of the academy, he saw a boy. That boy had his back turned to him, so he quietly called to him. That boy with a bandage on his forehead and sad, tired eyes looked at him with a questioning expression on his face. Jean awkwardly asked this young man if Guejman was here, while this young man listened intently while working with a large iron hammer. Kwok Jong thought to himself that the instructor was telling him that they really teach martial arts here, but the voice of his interlocutor pulled him out of his thoughts and said that they make covers. He thought in his mind, who is this man standing in front of him? Then he asked him if he was alone here. This man with a blue bandage on his forehead immediately answered that no, he is not here alone, he is here with his teacher. But the young man did not understand with which other teacher. How can a teacher be here if they are making lids for pots? Chong decided to ask him again if he actually needed a mentor for this, and he replied that of course he didn't. The young man with a bandage answered that he was studying martial arts with his teacher. Chong in turn thought that how could this be so? John was a little sad. He even lowered his eyes and head, slowly exhaling, and asked if it was Guejgan. Then the young man with the bandage said no and asked him if it was a martial art. He looked quite funny. The young man began to get very angry with anger. He even closed his eyes. You didn't know what to answer so as not to call this boy names. Zhang was very angry. He mentally wanted to send this boy, but still he held back. But suddenly the door opened and a man appeared. He asked who was talking there. The boys turned to him. Chong even had hope in his eyes, but the man with the bandage turned around, not understanding anything at all. In front of them stood a man with shoulder-length gray hair with a beard and mustache, broad eyebrows, and a bandage on his forehead. He was also dressed in a brown robe and gray pants. Chong immediately introduced himself. He gave his first and last name and asked if they teach the martial art of cover here. The young man already began to doubt and worry. He asked again, and the old man finally answered that this is how this art is taught here. The old man immediately began to quickly turn his head in different directions and look for a sign. He began to worry because he could not find it. Sadness began to show on his face until suddenly he found it. The young man began to tell that he happened to hear about a martial art called Guejgan, which had a base on the lid of a pot. It had a base on protection, being at the height of its popularity. It was practiced by the best masters in the world. It was a real martial art. It was in no way inferior to the stability of God himself. Correcting his sign, the old man was very surprised that this young man knew so much about this martial art. With excitement on his face, the young man asked if he could learn this art from him. The old man with a calm face asked if he really wanted to. With a kind face, the old man left and said that it just doesn't happen in this world, and the young man with a blue armband with whom Chong had been talking from the very beginning was very happy. The happiness was reflected in his face. This young man with a bandage on his forehead very joyfully asked his teacher if he really had a sister in training. The old man said that nothing has been decided yet, that is, there is no final answer yet, but Kwok Chun was bothered by the fact that he was once again confused with a girl. But the old man looked very carefully at this young man. He said that he looked very weak and asked if he really had enough strength. At first Chong did not understand what he was talking about. The old man added that the school leaves much to be desired. Therefore the old man replied that he should have made lids for pots, and then he would be able to study at his school. The young man in turn thought that poverty was very visible. Chong immediately understood that that young man was also being used here. Laughing to himself, he realized that it wouldn't work like that. He held out a gold coin and thought that he would try to trust his mentor. The old man was so frightened that he jumped in surprise. He could not believe his own eyes that he saw a gold coin in front of him. The old man very quickly shook hands with this young man, and he in turn thought that this one was also no different from the previous teacher. The man's mood was very high, and he said that he was already his student, and the boy with a blue bandage on his forehead was so happy that he even jumped on the spot with his hands up and shouted non-stop that he had a sister. John confirmed that before that he wanted to see Gwaejgon. This guy with a blue armband replied that of course he would show him everything. He wanted to do this in order to make sure that he would not be deceived again. He was determined. He needed to see what kind of martial art it was in general, but he saw a rather interesting picture in front of him. This young man with a blue armband could hardly lift this lid. Instead Kwok Yung thought that it took half a day just to lift this lid. Kwok Jong doubted that it could work. He was pulled out of his thoughts by the boy, who finally lifted the lid and shouted to the teacher that he was ready. This boy raised the lid to his face and closed it. He prepared himself and concentrated. You guy started running at a crazy speed, covering himself with a cover. He ran and shouted that he was starting. Suddenly stones flew into the air and dust filled the entire air. John stood in shock with his mouth wide open. At the same place where the guy with a blue bandage and a cap in his hands was standing, a huge crater appeared around him, as if a meteorite had fallen on that place. The young man raised his hand and shouted that because he was watching he was nervous and could not show all his strength, but in fact he could do more. The old man leaned over to the young man and whispered that it was a real martial art. The old man asked him if he would try to learn this martial art, and they shook hands again. Kwok Jong bent down to the teacher and asked him to take care of him. In this way he expressed all his respect for him. Suddenly he remembered Ms. Kyung A bakery and realized that once he honed his skills he would be able to defeat her. For 3 months he repeated only the basic training, which was no different from the last school. He couldn't believe that he was starting all over again. Jong ran with these caps and trained very well because the teacher told him that his muscles and bones were very bad. But he realized that fortunately this difficult training helped him a lot in the empty dungeon. Chi began to accumulate quite quickly. Then he fully began to train, and he also knew that his past mentor trained in this school and he had a good talent. A whole year passed so quickly. On one clear, warm, sunny day, a young man with a bandage said that he was going home. In response, his teacher delayed him a little. His teacher held out a bag in his hand and said that this was his salary for that month. The teacher asked him not to spend all the money and bring it home to his mother. The young man was pleasantly surprised and smiled. Suddenly someone called the teacher. He quickly turned his head to the voice calling him. It was Kwok Yung. He asked with surprise on his face where Abo was going. The old man replied that on the days when they don't have training he always goes home instead. In response, the young man was very surprised by this. He even asked the teacher if he really goes home because he thought he lives here. The teacher explained to him that if he went from here to the road there was a place for the poor. There was his house. He asked if he had ever been there. Then Yung remembered that he still called him sister, and he thought that he still wanted to be friends with him, but Kwok Yung didn't even want to talk to him. The teacher explained to him that Bo doesn't do it on purpose, to which Jong exhaled and doubted it very much. The young man asked that if he had a house he probably had a family, and the old man answered that of course it was. The old man began to tell about his family. He had a mother who was left alone with her children, 6 brothers and 6 sisters. His next brother was Yun Bo at the age of 20. He was already the head of merchants. He really liked to calculate everything. And his other brothers and sisters are very smart. They learned to write, but it cost a lot of money, so his mother also worked a lot. The young man understood that they tried very hard, and the old teacher confirmed it because it was actually so he couldn't just stand still. With incomprehension in his eyes, the boy looked at his teacher more carefully and asked what it meant. The teacher scolded again, one cover to a bunch of others, and told him to put it on there and start running. Today he needs to run 20 laps with them. The young man looked at his teacher with displeasure on his face and asked if he really needed to run since he already had chi, but instead the teacher told him to run 40 laps. The young man put on all these caps and ran, saying that he would return soon, but the old teacher just laughed. After that, he continued his training at the Gwaejgon school. A lot of time has passed in training. He has already grown up and looked more serious. An ordinary sunny day when Chong was sitting and meditating on the mountain, he closed his eyes and did not see that the teacher was walking behind him. Something was happening to him, but he could not understand what. When he touched his stomach, he realized that his chi had increased. He felt it in his soul. The teacher replied with a smile that since he trains a lot, it is natural. That the young man did not really want to admit it, but still said that it is actually a great martial art. Suddenly he realized that the teacher had hit him well and he bent down a little. Kwak Yung asked why he hit him. Instead, the teacher started shouting and asking why he didn't want to call it a martial art when the young man was a student of the 28th generation. Then the young man realized what he said and admitted that he bent his stick a little. The teacher began to tell that there were times when there were much more students in this school than now. In turn, the young man asked why so few people study. The teacher began to tell that this is such an incredible art that the strongest master in the world once personally asked him to learn this art. It was the 17th generation. After he learned this art, he began to flaunt his powers in front of everyone. He began to show it to the whole world. The young man was very pleasantly surprised and asked why it wasn't like it was back then, to which the old man didn't know what to answer. The old man replied that it was uncomfortable, so the young man immediately thought that it was really not a very comfortable conversation. The old man looked somewhere in the distance and said that he now has 2 of his students. Wasn't that enough to stay on the surface, and said that enough talk, is time to get down to business. The teacher immediately put the lid on him and told him to start running. Chong thought that he didn't have a single day of rest. One fine warm day, Kwak Yung was sweeping the yard of his school and heard someone calling an elder. He saw Jan. He asked Ajasi where the elder was. The boy replied that he didn't know where his teacher was, but the young man who ran up said that something had happened. Chong didn't understand what had happened. He replied that his partner was in mortal danger. Chong was very surprised by this, and he was also very scared for him. The young man was very sad. Why such trouble always happens when his teacher is not there. He rushed to look for the teacher. With all his might, he ran as fast as he could. He looked all around the lake and did not see anyone. He could not understand where to go, but he seemed to see him here. But suddenly the young man saw a lot of people in the distance. Something was definitely happening there. When he came a little closer and looked closely, he was very surprised to see the picture in front of him. It was that girl with red hair. She hit the ground so hard that the same crater that his partner had when he first showed him a new martial art. Because he could barely stand on his feet, they helped him to stand. When the young man saw this girl, he realized that this face he saw was Jayane Bekri. She answered that she thought he was an ordinary telepunk, but it was clear that he was studying martial arts somewhere. Because he was very angry, he started running and screaming so that the girl would not touch his brother. She said that his brother just needed to follow her quietly, but the problem was not his brother at all. She asked him to look at what he had done to the soldiers of her family. She said that he should now be punished. He started shouting at her to take only him and not touch his younger brothers because they are very kind. Instead, she said that he is a real fool and asked to follow her voluntarily. If they continued to disturb her, they would all die together. She asked Bo to convince her not-so-clever brother because she also didn't want to show her worst side. Because he had already begun to get very angry and go to meet her, he started shouting and asking if it wouldn't be enough for her to just take him himself, but the brother who was holding him by his side started shouting that it would be better for him to go himself. His brother began to deny that the forest was none of his business, but his elder brother said that he had to protect his younger brothers, and he was that younger brother. He said that even though he was stupid, he knew it because that's what people said. Instead, this girl said that if someone from her family takes someone away, they must die or they will be silent until death. He began to deny that his brother is very smart. He will not be able to become stupid. She calmly and with an unmoved face said that he did not understand the words and ordered to take his brother away. The boys were speechless. They didn't even know what to answer. The shock was reflected on their faces. Their faces even turned white from this uncontrollable shock. His younger brothers and sisters began to cry and call for help. She warned with a calm face that if they continued to deny everything, the whole family could suffer greatly. She ordered that both brothers be tied up if they started talking to the younger brothers again, and the sister was chopped off in the head. Why did the guards agree? Soon a deep voice rang out, causing this girl and Bo to turn to the side at the same time. John stood in all his glory. He ordered to stop it with a serious face. The girl could not understand who this young man was, to which he answered with a question asking if she did not recognize him. She got very angry and started shouting why should she know some poor person. When she noticed a pot lid on him, she realized that they were from the same gang. But he again ordered it to stop with a serious face. Suddenly the girl remembered how she knew him. She understood that he was a dragon warrior. Then she politely asked if he was still going where he didn't need to. He probably had no brains at all. She said this with all her confidence. When he replied that his friend was in trouble, he couldn't help but she laughed out loud in response. Not only she laughed, but other people, and especially her guards. She said that how could he then exchange the school of great dragon warriors for the martial art of covers? She was so surprised at his body that she beat him very badly. This is what probably prompted him to learn new martial arts. Chong stood quite confidently, and then he realized that he still lacked the strength to take revenge. Spreading her hands on both sides, she ordered to free his companion and his younger brothers and sisters. She said then why would she do that? He gave a short and clear answer to her question because it all depended on the lives of ordinary people like him and everyone else. He just prayed about it. When the anger reached higher than anywhere, she rudely asked who he thought she was. She was not delighted that she had such an opportunity to come to this hole in the morning. Then she ordered to tie them up. Her servants were shocked, but of course agreed to do it because they had no other choice, and she turned around and left at a very fast pace. But soon she did not understand what was happening, what noise she heard behind her. When she turned around, she saw a picture that she did not really want to see. When she turned and came back to the place, she understood when she saw that all the servants were lying on the floor unconscious. Then her eyes fell on Kwak Yung. He was looking at her from behind his cover and asked what she could do next. She became even more angry with anger in her eyes. She asked him if he was at all himself. Kwak Jong could not understand what was happening to his body. He himself, not understanding it, moved forward. So he realized that Mr. had disappeared. He decided to remind her that 3 years ago she said something unpleasant to him, but the girl could not understand what you were talking about and what words. He decided to remember those words. Then she told him that one day she would tear the veins in his legs and make him disabled. Then she remembered and confirmed that it was so, because then the teacher intervened and saved the young man, so she only beat him with a wooden sword. Then she asked if he wants to try again now. When the young man clearly and confidently answered what he wanted, Jayan Abekri was shocked by what she heard. Then he lowered the lid from his face and set the conditions that if he won that fight, she would just leave. The girl started laughing and shouting that the young man had no brains at all. Jayan, in a yellow outfit with red details, she held a decorated weapon in her hands. Her hand was stretched forward, showing a beautiful sword with golden elements and a red stone. Then she sharply drew her sword forward, pointed the sharp blade at the young man, and agreed to the conditions he set before her. The young man repeated the conditions once more to make sure and asked her to keep her word. The girl put the blade parallel to the floor, and then with a slight smile on her face said that her family always keeps their word, but she didn't have time to finish. Then the girl spun around so much that she was almost invisible. Kwak Jong was so surprised by this that he couldn't even react again. He stood there in shock. Then he realized that he was hit very hard with a sword. The girl gained so much strength that it was difficult for him not to be surprised. At the time when he was falling and he realized that there is still such a big difference between them, she still remains stronger than him. Then he realized that after all, the difference between them became even greater, and this is all after many years of training. The difference was still very noticeable. As he fell again, he understood that they were so different, and when he fell he could no longer get up. He realized that he had lost again and mentally asked his friend for forgiveness. 2 Sundays have already passed. The candle stood on the table, covering the room with warm light. The young man was lying on his bed and just looking at the ceiling. The teacher was very worried and was sitting next to him on the bed. When he realized that the young man had regained consciousness, he quickly stood up and nervously looked at him. The teacher's relief fell on his shoulders. He covered his face with one hand and thanked the young man that he finally came to his senses. He was really worried about him. Then the teacher sat by his bed and began to explain what happened after the young man fainted. First, they called a doctor and tried to heal the cut muscles of that girl. And his friend's family went together with that girl's family, but they were taken by the person who brought them in. It was Go Bayak from Mecca Inha from Chongnam province. And the Cree family would have already crossed all borders from their greed between Wasan and Chonam. Start relations heat up. It would not have been possible to win them by force because they put pressure on them. We used the financial power of merchants, and that's how it all turned out. Then after the 2 clans became aware of this, their family head personally bowed and apologized to elders Wasan and Chonam and officially declared that he would no longer put any pressure on the merchants. Then the teacher decided that he needed to apologize. He did it, but the young man did not understand why he was apologizing. The teacher admitted that the young man's body was too weak from the very beginning to study these martial arts, but the teacher craved it. He wanted gold. The young man again realized that he had fallen on the same hook. The teacher continued to tell when he began to study martial arts, he did not want to stop him. Then the teacher sat and cried, begging him for forgiveness for everything that happened to the young man. He admitted that it was completely his fault. But then the young man calmly said that he had nothing to apologize for. He already had some problems with this girl. If the teacher had not accepted him, then he would have gone to study in another city. Besides, he could not learn a decent enough martial art from that teacher. After all, the young man said that it was a great luck that he met you and his friend. The teacher was very pleased to hear this. His tears stopped for a moment and he turned his head to the young man. Kwak Yung couldn't tell if he thought he was crying or if the teacher was actually crying. The boy had a slight smile. He touched the teacher's shoulder and told him not to worry, so much his muscles would settle and it would be possible to start training again. The teacher, with a smile on his face, began to wipe the tears from his cheek and confirmed that of course it would be possible to start the training again. But then a rather interesting thought came to the young man's head. He had completely forgotten about it, but he could return to the past. Then he would be able to meet that genie again, so he decided that as soon as his body recovered, he would find that genie and remember his wish. Therefore, with a slight smile on his face, he realized that it was too early for him to give up. Not all was lost. When he came up with his plan better and better, he understood what exactly to implement it. It took him about 1 full year to completely heal his body. Although sometimes they could not find a common language with the teacher, they sometimes argued, but in the end they still got along well. Then he thought that if he had a family it would be the same. His mentor said that he had such bad control over his body and revealed the secret of one magical method. Thanks to that method, he would be able to discover additional inner powers. Then the young man packed his bag, and in the past tense, he met Gina. The teacher doubted whether he would really go alone, but he confirmed that he really wanted to return to his family. The teacher began to press for pity and said that he would be able to take care of the young man, but the young man did not understand and asked if the old man needed money again. With a smile on his face, he said that the amount of money he left could be enough for the rest of their lives, but the teacher with a serious expression on his face said that it was not the time for jokes and offered to go with him. The young man was very surprised by this. When he raised his head and looked at the teacher, he again saw tears welling up in his eyes. The young man understood that now was really not the time for jokes and took his teacher's hand and squeezed it tightly. John said he needed to do something, but he didn't finish. He just asked his teacher to trust him and let him go. The teacher exhaled heavily. The teacher agreed and said that it would be really hard for him to stop him, so he shook hands in return and left. When the young man left, he gained strength and courage. He realized that there was no chance of losing. He almost managed to calm the teacher and leave. After some time, he returned to the city where he found the genie lamp. Kwok Jong stood on the horizon in front of the city, and the sun, which was setting behind the clouds and mountains, shone with a golden glow. Two birds were flying in the evening sky where the clouds shone with gold and pink hues under the rays of the setting sun above the horizon. At that time, Chong had already entered the city. He realized that the city had not changed at all. He wondered if the locals would remember him. But he knew that if he was remembered, then, according to the rules, he would no longer be able to make a wish. But on the other hand, there was some advantage if he was not remembered. As he walked down the street, he was bathed by the warm sun that was setting behind the horizon. He realized that he might have a chance, but there was something that did not give him peace. Suddenly he realized that it was very strange because he did not see the lamp that he was supposed to find on the way. He remembered that then he actually found the lamp where he was standing then, and the time was also right at that time of day he found the lamp. Suddenly he felt a shock that something was wrong, something had changed, but he did not understand what. Soon the young man began to worry a lot. He realized that this was not going to happen. Clearly something was wrong here. He could not understand what the merchants were doing there at that time. But suddenly he saw a lamp lying on the floor, almost golden in the setting sun. The dark entrance to the cave was hidden among rocks and thick vegetation, where pale light penetrated through the leaves and illuminated the path dotted with small fireflies. It was in that cave that the young man rubbed this thing again, and a genie appeared from the lamp. The whole cave was enveloped in white smoke, and the genie's laughter echoed. Jin's eyes shone with a blue glow again. The smoke enveloped him completely. He told him to make any 3 wishes, and he could easily fulfill them. The young man was very happy because he knew that he was holding luck by the tail. Jin waited with a smile for orders from his new master. But suddenly the young man realized that Jin had a rather strange reaction. He did not understand what had happened. The guy immediately thought that he realized that he had returned to the past using a wish. In the end, it was impossible to think of anything else. When he looked around, he thought that Jin noticed all the treasures that were in this cave. Then he remembered how stupid he was to remember these treasures in this particular cave. But suddenly Jin's face changed. He became stricter, pointing his finger at the young man. He began to understand. He began to understand that he must be very rich. Relief fell from the young man's shoulders like a 1,000-year burden. Rubbing the back of his head, Jin said that if he could give such wealth, he would have to put in a lot of effort. Then he added that this also did not mean that he would no longer be hungry for money, but the young man thought that for the first time he should pretend that he was seeing him for the first time in his life. After that, he did the same as he did once on the day when they first met. He listened to all the rules according to which you need to make a wish. Then the young man was ready to make his wish. Jin stood and listened attentively to what he wanted. As soon as the boy started to open his mouth to make a wish, Jin stopped him. He warned the boy that he needed to think about the wish very well. It was the only chance to make a wish. But the young man, with a smile on his face, insisted that he should not worry about any little things. He already knew exactly what he wanted. Jin scratched his head a little awkwardly with his hand and awkwardly asked if he was sure, then asked what his wish was. The young man began to make his first wish. It was a wish to have a talent for martial arts. He wanted to be the most talented, a talent that was given to him by the heavens themselves, but at first the genie did not understand how it was, so he asked his master. As soon as the young man began to explain with a serious expression on his face, he interrupted him. With a smile on his face, he warned the young man not to tell him anything as he was an all-powerful genie. He could get any information himself. Laughing, he got down to business. He asked the young man to wait for 1 second and seemed to disappear in a cloud of smoke. The young man was already hoping that his wish had worked. But when the genie returned, he was upset. He lowered his head and said with a sad face that he couldn't do it. He apologized to his master and asked if maybe he had another desire, so he asked to fill his body with yin or yang or open the flow of energy through the blood. Suddenly the genie hastened to deny that this wish could not be fulfilled, but the young man became very angry. He began to tell that he looked at those people, they were real monsters, they did very bad things. He is an omnipotent genie. He must fulfill his wishes, but he is too weak to carry such things into real life. Then the young man began to think about what else he wanted to be wished for, but the genie interrupted his train of thoughts. He could give a replacement body for martial arts and God's blessing that would give energy. He could do exactly. That's why the young man didn't argue and deny. He decided that it was also not bad and thanked Jin. But so that the young man did not regret the genie could fulfill any other wish of his, instead the boy did not think for a joke. He began to think about what he really needed now. Maybe he needed the secret of all martial arts, or maybe medicine for everything in the world he didn't know then. Then he had a great idea. He wished that he had the ability to run away very quickly in any situation. Jean did not understand what the young man said, so he looked at him with a strange expression on his face. He remembered his words because earlier Jean had said that this city was actually full of monsters. Then it didn't matter how many martial arts he might know, it was useless to fight against them. Embarrassed, the young man scratched the back of his head and asked if it was possible to implement it. He admitted that it was a little confusing. He explained it and Jean confirmed it. Then the young man looked at him with a strange expression. The genie's eyes lit up again and he said that he could fulfill any of his wishes. A high mountain rose on the horizon where giraffes drank water from small lakes surrounded by green vegetation under the bright sunlight that flooded the valley. They realized that they were in a completely different country. It was a surprise for the young man because they were in Africa. The young man asked where they were and he was told that it was a city called Africa. It would take 5 or 6 years to get there. Jean asked the young man to look where he was showing him. He saw an elephant and asked if it was really what he was seeing. Then he saw a lion, which he had seen only in books before. He could not believe his own eyes. While the young man stood in complete shock, the genie told that there was nothing to be surprised about. It was simply the power of teleportation. Yun Kushal just asked if he thought that he said the power of teleportation. He understood that now he could run away from any danger. No one could kill him if it was not God. With this power, he was able to stay in the Shaolin Temple in Wasan, and he could also enter the North Sea Ice Castle, the Heavenly Demon Church, and the Podalap Palace as his home. Jean could not understand what happened. The young man asked him what happened to him. He understood that something was wrong with the expression of the genie's face. He asked if there was any problem when he scratched the back of his head awkwardly during the conversation. Jean didn't know how to start the conversation. Then he decided to directly say that this power was a one-time anger sneaked up on Chong imperceptibly. It was a warm summer evening when the full moon shone over dense tropical forests and high rocks. Jean and Jung were still standing in the same city, both stunned, especially the young man. He even decided to ask again if it was actually a one-time thing. The boy began to deny and said that he was able to send them back and forth. The genie confirmed this because he was very strong. Then the young man began to think of another plan. He asked him if there was some other plan. The genie was really thinking seriously, or maybe just pretending. He remembered that he had a spare option. It was a carpet that flies across the sky at high speed. At first the boy did not believe that this carpet could fly, but the genie confirmed that this way he could be high in the sky and no one would be able to receive him. But the young man wondered what would have happened if his enemy's knife had been closer to his throat even before he had time to take off on this carpet. Jean began to assume that he could simply die, and then the young man asked if he remembered why he asked him for a quick way to quickly run away, then immediately began to apologize to him. Then the genie remembered that he had a wonderful method that would help him in this, and the young man cautiously began to listen to him very carefully. At first he asked if this method was exactly repeated. Jean confirmed that not everything was fine. Then the young man asked if he could escape from Master's knife. Jean also confirmed this. The young man admitted that it was even difficult for him to believe in this because it sounded really fantastic. Jean asked to start looking where he was pointing. When the young man looked there, he did not understand anything. He saw an inexplicable shadow that reminded him of something that he could not understand. Then the young man saw a magnificent white horse with a magnificent mane standing gracefully on its hind hooves in the moonlight and surrounded by magical dust. But then Jean hurried to correct him because it was a mythical unicorn from legends. Everyone was very skeptical about the existence of unicorns, but he had an extraordinary intelligence. In addition, he could move at an extraordinary speed so that no animal or person in the world could catch him, and he could heal and poison. Jean wanted to continue talking about unicorns, but the boy interrupted him and asked him to wait. He did not understand what the matter was. Embarrassed, he said that he was a little wary of such deep knowledge at the expense of unicorns. He assumed that there was some kind of limitation. Jean, with a look of shock on his face, did not understand how he had guessed this restriction, but it was clear as day. When the boy began to ask about any restrictions on the account of unicorns, the genie was a little embarrassed. The main point in this plan was that the owner himself personally caught this unicorn. The genie could not help himself in this. The guy didn't even know how to react to this, but the genie offered to drop him to the place of residence of these creatures in exchange. A white unicorn with a long mane stood by the water at night, reflecting the moonlight. Shadows danced on the surface and no people were visible. Suddenly the unicorn heard a rustle and lifted its head up. The young man understood what he thought the second own wish and teleported exactly there. He stood and carefully examined this unicorn. He did not know what to do with him next. The genie warned him that if the unicorn came close, there would be no need to do anything strong. It would be very dangerous, but the young man did not understand why, because when he saw a wild horse he would decide to tame it just like that. But since the unicorn was extremely strong, it could get very angry, and in anger it is very scary, so it was impossible to subdue it by force. Then confused, the young man asked what he could do, but instead began to mock him and told him to put his finger in the unicorn's porridge and taste it so that he could lose his observation. Chong very got angry. He could not understand that scumbag says that. At first the boy thought that it was a complete delusion, but as Jean said, the unicorn is very careful, so nothing would have happened. But the genie told him to remember the difference between the unicorn litter and the usual one. When he actually saw it, he was shocked. It even glowed with a rainbow. Then the young man remembered what the genie told him, that they could become friends. If he tasted the droppings of this unicorn, the young man's face became as white as canvas. When he touched it, he realized that he didn't want to do it at all. But in order to get it, he was ready for anything, so he noticed this. When he started to raise his finger to his mouth, he mentally convinced himself that he could do it. He could not even do that. When he tasted it, the unicorn was shocked, even sickened, and sickened even by the rainbow. The young man did not understand what was happening. He stayed in one position and could not even move. Then he saw a very divorced unicorn already running towards him. Then the young man began to understand that something was wrong. Something did not go according to plan at all. Suddenly he felt a very dull blow and realized that he was flying backwards onto the floor. After one short moment, the young man realized that he was no longer on land. He was already diving underwater. He finally realized this when he emerged from the water because he was short of air and his lungs began to burn. When the young man came to his senses, he realized that something was wrong. He almost did not see his future unicorn. When he looked more closely, he realized that he was walking away from him. When the boy shouted after him where he was going, he didn't even move. The young man remained in water up to his chest, and the unicorn left him, so he did not know what to do with him. When he was wringing out his clothes from the water, he realized that he had completely lost his mind. He was shocked at himself for believing the words of the genie, so he decided that from that day on he was no longer Kwok-sog but Monchong, who ate unicorn droppings. But suddenly he saw a blue glow of strange dust that seemed magical to him. This dust was all around him. He couldn't understand whether it seemed to him or it had already started. When the young man suddenly opened his eyes, he could not understand where he was. He was lying on the stone floor, and there were coins and a lid next to him, but he still could not understand what happened and where he was. Then the young man realized that he found himself in the city. He did not have time to tame the unicorn, and the genie just took it and returned it, thus fulfilling the third wish. Later he remembered the genie who said that teleportation in time required a lot of strength, but he could try. The young man was of course happy that he returned 5 years ago, but he still did not have time to tame this strange creature. When he saw a lid and some gold near him, he realized that Jean had also granted his wish by giving it to him. Then he sat down and looked at his hands. He also then remembered his first wish, probably the same main thing. When the young man began to examine his hands and look at them, he realized that this is what it is like to have strong muscles. Then he finally understood why the teacher taught him through rich and generous training. Then his words had a deeper meaning. Then he understood that all the basics of martial arts began to be perceived in a new way. Then he understood what it really is to have talent, but he was still sorry that he could not tame a unicorn. Maybe one day he will succeed. So the young man decided to leave here for a start. He got up and started to go out to the beginning of the tunnel. When he came out, he saw in front of him rich golden sands and dunes, as well as the sun which burned under it, all living and not living. The young man was standing on the edge of the mountain and was in complete shock as the wind, which had a high temperature, burned the skin of his face and exposed parts of his body. Then he shouted at the top of his lungs, where the hell was he? It seemed to him that panic was getting closer and closer. Kwok Jong saw before him a sunny city in the desert with buildings, moving streets, and mountains on the horizon. Life on these streets was truly bubbling. People of completely different nationalities were even drawn in by others. The man commanded the camel and said that he finished everything well. Another man said that everything was loaded and everything was fine. Another man with long hair thanked him. Then the man with the long hair turned and shouted to the others that it was okay to go. At that time, the young man was buying something in a small shop, keeping the lid ready. He began to hurry, so he gave the gold coin to the seller and took his goods because they shouted at him to hurry. Then he turned to the voice that called him and said that he understood and could go, and the man who took the gold coin was in shock. Jean sent him to the West End for several terrible months. He tried to communicate with people in sign language because no one understood the boy's language. But fortunately, he was lucky enough to meet a caravan of merchants who were going to the central region. He decided to go with them. He also decided to share food with the chief, but he refused, arguing that the young man needed to eat more himself. When they went to the east, the young man trained and fought with bandits who were local at that time. So they quickly passed through the Silk Road and approached the central region. She also found out that there were rumors about him, but he was not very happy about them because he was called a ghost girl. Also, he heard it from someone in front, so he decided to shout so that he would not be called that, because then he was just fighting with bandits in order to survive. He was shocked that everyone was confusing him with a girl. Even behind his face, he constantly claimed that he was a boy and not a girl, but the head laughed at this and told him to think about it in a better light. Then Jae Chong Sob said that the fame about him reached the west to the central region. That's how quickly rumors could spread. He could not not understand at all how this boy was taken to those parts, as he did not want to tell what exactly happened to his family. Everyone would be very surprised. Instead, Sun asked why they would be surprised. The chairman said that by the time their caravan reaches the center, others will be there, and a lot of people will gather who will be interested in what the event is all about. Then he added that if these people find out that the girl Pramara came with them the last part of the journey, then most likely there will be a lot of people around him and attention. The more he looked at the boy, the more he was surprised that he was mature for his age and was always immersed in thoughts. They rode on camels next to each other, and the young man thanked for this compliment, but the head said that it was not just words, it was really sincere. Then the man asked if the guy already has a bride or maybe a girl for whom he has some feelings. He replied that he doesn't have anything like that. Therefore, the man immediately began to act. He suggested that he go home with him, and the man introduced him to his daughter. The young man was very surprised and embarrassed. He thought that the man was jumping from topic to topic too quickly. When the man laughed and asked if he agreed, the young man did not know what to answer and remained nervously silent. But suddenly someone fell asleep. When he turned around, he saw his friend calling him. He announced that the Manjaks were already on their way. When the chairman asked if they were on their territory, without waiting for an answer, he said that he would negotiate with them. Then he ordered to keep the swords at the ready. Suddenly some unforeseen situation would arise. The man bowed to him and agreed. John Kwok immediately offered his help without hesitation, and the chairman already knew that he would do so. Then with a serious face he refused his offer and ordered to stay close to him, and then asked if that would be enough. Then the man sped up to the camels laughing and said that he would see the strength of his reputation. The young man, keeping his composure, agreed. When everyone else left, the young man hurried and decided to carry out the order. Then he remembered how he was called a ghost girl and felt a little sad. Then he asked the head to call him Chong. Toy agreed and said that the robbers were most likely Majaks. They could be called absolute strength. He didn't know what the guy in the west was dealing with, but where they were, there were those who were actually masters of martial arts. Tahayan Il asked for everyone's safety to follow his orders without questioning them. For a moment Zhang of course agreed. The real Chanwon Du Kyungwon could only think that he, as the most fearsome warrior of the caravan, was worried in front of a gang of robbers. So who are they in general, and who were they really? While he was in his thoughts, he saw that they were already leaving. He saw people in black. They were completely covered in black clothes from head to toe, and they were riding horses at an incredible speed. Chong thought whether they were really black Majaks. He looked at them, and the tension in his muscles grew with every second. Then next to a group of those robbers, he saw innocent people who were tied and very tired. Kwok Yung didn't even notice how the anger settled on his shoulders again. So he shouted at the top of his lungs for them to stop immediately. Kyung's voice behind him, Il Toy, asked where Zhang had gone. He turned to him and began to shout that there were only 20 of those bandits. He could not believe that not a large group of freaks could somehow harm them. The guy continued that their strength was enough to crush them in the literal sense, but suddenly the man interrupted him, asking if it was not because he saw those people nearby. Then Bo Kyung Il didn't let Chan go. The young man didn't understand why he answered like that, because in his opinion those people needed to be saved. The man explained that he could not risk his people in order to sleep them. When the young man hurried to deny that there were not so many of them, the man continued that there were only about 500 black Manjaks, and that was only a small part of them. Chong was very surprised by this particular number of these robbers, and he broke into a cold sweat. In addition, their leader, the Blood of the Desert, was recognized as the strongest a long time ago. His level had already reached the extreme limit. He came to that desert when he was pursued by the Association of Master Murim, as well as many of his subjects, incredible warriors. The man decided to make sure that Chong understood that it was such a serious matter, but the young man decided to remain silent. But in his heart and in his thoughts, he kept thinking about how you can help poor people. Then Jae Chong sobbed sand to address the head of the Channun Merchant Guild. He began to say that he had heard rumors about the reputation of the black heroes of the desert, then continued that it was a great honor for him to meet him. The head laughed sharply and said that he knows how to speak well. He continued that he was in a good mood for the day. Yulo is not one but two cases. He didn't stop and continued to praise his wonderful day and mood, and meanwhile Kwok Yung standing among his people and listening to it. Then Jae Chong sobbed. There was a not very small bag with something, and of course it was pure gold coins. The head took that bag and decided to look inside with a smile. Suddenly he screamed as loud as he could, as if he was mocking him. Then he saw Kwok Chong, who was already standing in front of him, holding his cap at the ready. It seemed that the head recognized him, calling him a ghost girl. The chairman decided to ask if he was actually this ghost girl. All the people who were with him dressed in black were surprised that it was him. They looked at the young man without taking their eyes off him. Then all the people, that is the merchants who went with them, began to care about the young man, including the girl who was with him paid attention to him. She looked at the young man without taking her eyes off her and began to pretend to be him. Then the head coughed to attract the attention of not only his subjects but also the attention of merchants. Suddenly he shouted that they were leaving. He announced it to everyone in a very loud and rude voice. All his subjects in black robes obeyed him and followed him. Suddenly the head of the guild, Jae Chong Sob, exhaled heavily and wiped the sweat from his forehead with his white sleeve. Later he praised all his comrades, but the young man stood and remained silent, not knowing what to add to him. Yes, Chong Sab said that thanks to Chong they avoided a lot of problems. They were actually very lucky in that regard. Suddenly a voice called out to the head of the traders and told him that they wanted to tell him something. Against the background of high rocks stood two tents with a raised flag that the majors were blowing in the wind. Several stones were lying nearby and the darkness of the night reigned around. The soldiers slept around campfires, some sat on benches, others lay on the ground in the open air near the tents. Suddenly this was seen by Kwok Jong, who was looking out from the cliff. He watched them very carefully without lowering his gaze. He realized that he had finally found their camp, but he did not know what to do next. He had no further plan. Suddenly he heard a voice behind him and realized that he was seen. He froze like that stone next to him. The boy decided to go back to see who this brave man was who was able to see him and tell others about it. He saw a man with a patch over one eye and black hair that was tied in a tail. Behind him stood his army in black robes. He said that you can't call celebrities rats because he recognized him and called him a ghost girl again. He said that everything turned out as they planned, as their leader said that they were sure that the young man would follow them. The guy covered half of his face with a lid, trying to protect himself as much as possible. He prepared for this. He thought that how did they even understand that he could follow them? This man began to laugh and say that it was already too late and maybe he will leave in a good way until he can let him go. When he was talking, he did not understand that the cover had already been blown on him. Zhang threw his lid so that a crater-like crater appeared again on the ground and the dust rose, completely filling the entire free space. But the man didn't even move with a smile on his face. He said that the young man seemed to scare him, but that was not the case at all. The man stood next to that crater and said with a smile on his face that he could have died, but he didn't believe it at all. The boy understood that the man was able to escape from his cover very quickly, but how he did it at all was unclear to him because he even threw a metal object at him very quickly. The man understood why they told him that he needed to be constantly on guard with this young man. Then he decided that it wouldn't work like that, and in response he also needed to hit him at least once without agreeing. The man did not understand what was happening. Suddenly the young man accelerated with all his might and ran at the man holding the cover in front of him, thus cutting the air like a bird of prey. Then he threw this cover at him. This time he managed to hit the target exactly. With a smile on his face, he said that this time he aimed more precisely, that's why he succeeded. The man stood up very quickly and said that this guy was very ignorant, he already had his sword ready. Suddenly the man shouted that all his subjects in black robes were standing and ordered to attack the young man altogether. Suddenly men in black flew into the sky like bats and began to attack the young man in groups. But the boy was not lost and began to fight them off. He threw the lid at the first man in black with all his might. The lid bounced first from one man to another and from the other to the third. From the side it looked as if the young man was having fun playing some kind of game. When the chief saw this, he ordered to kill this young man. The two men battled with weapons expressing determination and intensity, one of them wielding a sword, the other defending himself, the dynamics of their movements reflecting the force of their clash. Suddenly the boy decided to throw an iron cap at the man without even hesitating. The lid flew, cutting through the air in its path. The young man mentally told himself that until all the people are saved, he cannot lose this battle. Several minutes have passed. Both of them did not end in any way. There were too many people in black. After a while, he lowered his head and realized that almost all the men were on the floor and did not move. Their weapons were lying nearby and their faces were looking at the ground. When Zhang looked up, he realized that he had dealt with almost all the people in black. But there were still a few left in front of him. He saw the head of these people in black. They were all tired and almost not moving. When the man saw that the young man had beaten almost everyone, he realized that he had also beaten his juniors, so he became even more angry and threatened to kill the young man. But the young man realized that he was very tired. He could not even raise his hand, and this lid weighed a lot, so his tired body refused to listen to his master's orders. When he saw a man in front of him with a sword in his hands, he realized that maybe this was the end. He did not know what he could do next. When the man swung with all his might, the sword went up with a hiss, cutting through the air in its path. The young man lowered his head and closed his eyes and mentally told himself that he could not do anything, but the man standing in front of him let him die sooner. The young man opened his eyes a little and saw that the sword was almost in front of him. He realized that there was no way back. It was a kinetic stop. When the man was already swinging his sword for the second time, aiming exactly at his target, that is not at the young man who was in front of him, something did not go according to plan. Suddenly the young man realized that there was no sword strike, so he decided to open his eyes and saw a rather beautiful picture in front of him. A girl with long dark hair was standing in front of him. A sword was on her shoulder smeared with blood. She was asking if everything was okay with the young man. The southerners in black who remained could not understand what had happened. They could not believe their eyes, so they stood and did not move. Suddenly, the girl killed the other two men in black with a single movement of her sword. John was very shocked because he had to try very hard to kill at least one, and she was able to kill two at once with one move. The girl stood and looked down on the young man, and he could not understand what kind of girl it was. Then her friends met her. One of them was very angry with her because she asked her not to go anywhere alone, but the girl herself was probably not too worried about that little thing. When the girls took off their wigs, John was very shocked. Only her friends took them off. Then one of them asked if she wanted to meet the ghost girl so badly that she didn't even wait for them. The young man was not very surprised that her friends' girls must have taken off their wigs. He was most surprised by the name of the girl who saved his life because her name was so volume. The girls began to discuss the battle and each other's bravery, while Jong wondered if it was Prada and Lee Seo-wool, the brilliant but secret student of Ami's faction. The young man did not take his eyes off the girl. He had a strong impression as he had heard so many rumors about her. When one of her friends came forward, she turned to Chong, but of course calling him a ghost girl. Folding her hands, she introduced herself. Her name was Jong. In and Ami, her sister Seo-wool, said that Jong would definitely come to save them, but no one could have expected that this was the case. Seo-wool approached her friend and also folded her hands like her. They both wanted to thank the ghost girl for the spirit of a true warrior praise, the Buddha Amitabh. The young man quickly folded his hands like girls and laughingly said that he needed to thank. The girl without hair continued that if he suddenly wanted to receive the Buddha's lessons, he could come to them at any time. Then she added that he could also teach the martial arts of the main faction. The young man was so happy that he immediately thought to himself, could such an opportunity really come to him? But then he realized that something was wrong because there were only girls in Amma, or maybe it seemed to him then. When the girls were still standing in front of him, he decided to inform them that he was not a girl. But the young man did not have time to say anything when they all heard a very loud sound that sounded like stones. When the girls turned to the sound, they realized that it had already begun. Then one said that they also needed to join, and soon the other agreed with her, and John sat on the floor and tried to say who he really is. When the girl started to leave, she turned a little to Chan and waved one hand. She really hoped that they would see each other again. But the young man didn't have time to say anything as the girls started moving away from him, so Ami dealt with the Majaks. They killed everyone in the end. It turned out that not a single one of the 500 robbers was left alive. Then the girls told that they then had a reason to break one of their main commandments, which was not to kill, so the young man was asked to keep what he saw a secret. He promised that he would meet with them again and promised to keep their secret. Then he left the robbers and finally arrived at the center. When he arrived at the center, the boy entered the institution and realized that rumors can always spread very quickly. At the next table, he heard two men talking to each other. One of them said that he had heard how a brilliant girl had beaten the entire camp of black Majaks. Then the other person understood who was being talked about and supported the conversation by saying that she went to the camp of black robbers and killed 500 people in one night. The man continued that the monks from the Anhisa temple in Sanchin went in search of the Chianchuk country, but the black Majaks overtook them and killed them. The men continued to discuss. One of them added that the girl did the right thing by taking revenge on them. Then the other added that these bandits have no concept of morality at all, so it was good that they were not around then. But then another man said that they don't know the additional story yet. Everyone started asking what exactly they don't know. You said that the girl did not cope with those bandits by herself. They said that there was a ghost girl with her. Hearing this, Chong, who was eating his food, choked on her. The men looked shocked at the one who was telling this, and Chong at the next table couldn't come to his senses. He was constantly called a ghost girl. He didn't like it very much. He was kind of shocked that the rumors spread so quickly to the city. He didn't even have time to arrive here as the rumors were already there. The sky was filled with shades of yellow, orange, and pink, indicating morning or evening. The light from the sun shone through the clouds, creating a warm glow over the landscape. The mountains looked steep and were shadowed to give them a three-dimensional appearance. Walking along a small path in the warm forest, the boy realized that the word-of-mouth radio worked very quickly. He did not even expect it. Then he saw in front of him what he wanted to see for a long time. People walking to the traditional East Asian gate. The architecture points to the historical environment, the stone bridge path, and the classical buildings decorated with red lanterns. So Chong realized that he was in the right place. He ran across the bridge and shouted joyfully that he had finally arrived there. As soon as he approached the gate, he saw his old friend who was engaged in creating a new cover, who also noticed him. But since he did not know him, he politely apologized so that you would pay attention to him. Gwaejmun is located here. He was greatly relieved because he was finally back there. The boy began to tell that as a last will the master asked him to go to the central region and find him, namely the teacher who was sitting in front of him. The young man continued that he could not even think then that Gwaejmun actually exists. The teacher laughed and agreed with the young man. The teacher said that he also did not know that there is a city where this martial art is also taught. Instead instead the young man asked him to speak with him more freely as they are all brothers and sisters. The teacher agreed with him and added that it was very good to get an assistant at his age and even more so in factors. The teacher also added that he could not even dream of such a thing. Instead, his future friend stood next to the teacher and was very happy. Instead, the young man realized that his friend still remained a telepnym. Chong asked if he could find out when this young man who was next to him started studying. The teacher answered that he started studying at the age of 10. Then the young man realized that he was older because he had been learning this since birth, so his mood improved a little. Therefore, the teacher warned Bo that he should not call him little sister but older, because suddenly his face changed and he didn't understand why he needed to call this guy that. The teacher began to tell that the young man was enrolled as a student earlier, and in martial arts it is not taken into account by age but by the time when the student was initiated, because he suddenly shouted that he had an older sister and it was great for him. But this made the young man so angry that he could not even find the right words to describe his anger. But suddenly the teacher carefully looked at the young man and decided to ask him one interesting question. More than once he was a ghost girl. This question threw the young man into a parallel reality. Later, several months later, rumors of a ghost girl spread around the city. And then everyone started talking about the girl who dealt with the black robbers in the desert, but they also added the ghost girl to that story. The young man was shocked that these rumors reached the teacher himself and said that he did not want to do this, but it just happened that way. The teacher understood and agreed. With a smile on his face, the teacher said that perhaps the young man could become the most famous student of his academy in the entire history, because there was no ancestor who could get such a reputation outside of one region. The teacher asked how well he had mastered the martial art called Gwaejgon, so the young man replied that he had finally passed to the third stage. With understanding faces, the teacher and his younger student looked at the young man and understood that he already had a foundation. Let's go. Later they were in the yard and the young man asked for sparring with the teacher himself. He could never have thought that immediately upon meeting him, he would be asked to spar with him, so he thought that he was a real psychopath. Fixing the cap in his hand, he apologized but said that he was wondering what his limit was. The teacher was relieved and said that he was also interested in finding out, so he decided to give the young man a chance to fight him. But then the young man realized that he would fight with Bo, who in turn asked him to be careful and he would take care of it so that everything would be fine with him. The young man could not understand whether he was really saying this or was joking with him. The teacher in turn tried to stop them both. So the boys went to their cities. The teacher stepped aside and started a duel. Having gathered strength, the young man ran away and ran at him, subconsciously knowing that he would win in one blow. But then the young man found himself on the floor. He could not understand how it happened. He was shocked by it. He asked aloud what it was, but in response he only heard the question of whether he had flown away or not. Because in turn he stood laughing, half covered with his cap, and said that the pretty girl had flown away. When the young man got up, he realized that his friend was looking at him from above. Then he regained his strength. You started running at your opponent, thinking that this time he will succeed. But the woman again quickly felt her opponent and landed on her back. People took the upper hand. He was beside himself with rage and swore what he would do until he succeeded. Watching this, the teacher realized that his guesses were confirmed. It was Gwanjgan, but there was something else. Watching how the young man flew to the floor again, he realized that he was too clumsy. The young man lay on the floor indignantly and shouted that he could not hit even once. But when the young man heard the question from his rival, whether he or rather she finished, the young man was unrecognizable from rage. Instead, Bo decided that now it was his turn to come. He was already ready to take cover. John was not in a position to stand up and agree on what he had not yet completed when the following happened. He saw in front of him the ground that was being removed from the force with which his opponent ran. He understood that now he will lie on the floor again. Over time, the young man was transferred to his room in the building attached to this academy. Suddenly, the boy woke up. He was covered in sweat. When he woke up, he realized that there was someone else in the room because he heard another voice. The teacher was sitting next to him and began to tell that Bo had a very heavy hand and warned that the young man was not injured at all. Sitting more comfortably on the bed, the young man with sadness on his face and in his voice said that he had lost again. The teacher did not know what to answer. After a few minutes, the teacher spoke, interrupting the silence that was born between them. The teacher began to tell that when he first heard about him, he expected a lot, and when he learned that the famous ghost girl was a follower of Gwaejgon, but suddenly the young man interrupted him with his question whether he had disappointed him. But the teacher explained that he was not disappointed in him at all because he revealed his basic skills and basics in a good way. He revealed himself very well there. He had nothing to be disappointed in him. Instead, the young man asked why he lost again. Maybe it was because of too little chi. With sarcasm in his voice, the teacher replied that this boy's past master was probably a genius, because how could he be so stupid? But the young man did not understand that it was sarcasm and thought that the teacher was praising himself now without knowing it. But the young man still could not understand what his problem was since he had a good foundation and the position was also not bad, besides he had a lot of practice, so he did not know what the main problem was then. He remembered and asked the teacher if he didn't notice how he tried to pretend that he was using exactly the 34th position from Gwanjepasan and then at the last moment replaced it with Hyung Mubiko. But the teacher of course noticed this, so he said that this was exactly his problem. With calmness on his face, eyes, and soul, the teacher said that his attacks and positions were very clumsy. It was a bit strange because it was clear that he studied very well, but for some reason his attacks were incredibly clumsy, but that was just his point of view, so he asked when his teacher died. Maybe it was when he started learning new attacks. Because actually around the same time the guy went back in time, but he couldn't say that, so he said that around that time his teacher died. So the teacher immediately understood that he was right because the young man knew the positions of the first part well, but the positions of the second part needed a lot of corrections. He still had a lot to learn because he did not learn everything. The teacher began to tell that the 3 final positions were combined into the first 33 positions, so it took a lot of effort to learn all the positions correctly. Therefore he agreed to teach him all these exceptions since the master had passed away, but it was quite strange for the young man to listen to this because he knew the truth. The young man was very happy to hear this. He was very happy, but in his mind, he understood that even when he returned again to the past, he came across Gwanjgan again. Being in his thoughts again, he realized that he wanted to win the battle in a bow, then gain the respect of the master and learn other martial arts such as the art of the sword. But he couldn't do anything because he didn't want to walk uneducated. He had only one way to go to the end. Then he remembered that he had to give money to the master. He took out a gold coin and handed it to him. He was so shocked that he could not even contain his shock. Suddenly the master shook the young man's hand and said that at that moment he would definitely be his student and he would teach him all the arts he knew. The young man agreed with a smile and asked him to take care of him. This is how another new life of young Kwok-chan in Gwangmun began. He studied harder than before. His technique was getting better every day, becoming more perfect at the level of dungeon. 2 years passed so quickly the young man didn't notice how time passed quickly, but then the day of his nightmare came back. Giant Abekri arrived again. Again, a lot of people gathered to watch what was happening. The girl won again. Nothing changed. The young man stood among people. He did not know and thought that if he intervened again, what was once would be the case. He didn't know how strong he was, so even if he had asked, he still wouldn't have been answered. He mentally apologized to his friend because he knew that this was the only chance to test his teacher what you are capable of. Suddenly he realized that someone was approaching. Looking closely, he did not recognize his teacher. Suddenly the young man began to worry himself without knowing what. The teacher came out very angry. He looked only at his target. The young man could not believe that it was really his teacher. The girl did not understand what kind of person had come, so she asked him to leave quickly. Because he was in shock that the teacher came, he could not even continue his sentence. Suddenly the teacher spoke in a low and rude tone. How dare they even touch his student? But suddenly the teacher burst into flames. His eyes became bright yellow. He looked like a mythical hero. Meanwhile, Chong could not understand what was happening to him. Was it his inner energy? Everyone present was shocked. They did not know what to do and what to say because the picture that appeared before them was quite unusual. Suddenly the teacher took the lid and with all his strength began to spin the car to run in the direction of his enemy, that is at this girl. The girl was shocked as well as her servant who was standing next to her. She did not know that such a strong chi could be in such an old grandfather and also in such a godforsaken place. Meanwhile, the old man was already approaching them and understood that now he would smash them into dust. He untwisted his cover so much that he made a deadly whirlwind with which he knocked down this girl's servants. Then he let go of the lid and a huge crater formed on the floor that was difficult to reach. The girl was shocked. She did not know how to react because she had never seen anything like this before. Later the old man introduced himself as Meiser, the 27th generation Gwaejgon and Huang's son, but if suddenly she wanted to take revenge, she could come to him at any time. When the old man had already decided to come out with his actions, he added that he could fight with her at any time when she wanted, as many times as she wanted. She was shocked. She didn't know whether to cry or rage. Her servants were scared because the old man had killed half of them. All the people standing around were shocked very much, especially Chong, who could not even move from the city. Then he realized what had happened. He was so happy that he scared the people standing nearby who were also watching. Then he looked down at his hands and wondered to himself if he could ever do that too. But suddenly determination appeared on his face. He realized that he would definitely be able to do this because it is not for nothing that he trains so much. When the old man was already walking with his participants, Chong realized that he would definitely be able to do this. He would definitely become stronger. A few months later, the Inha Guild was trading at the foot of Mount Chonam. Suddenly, the man who was standing by the door guarding it could not understand who was approaching. He asked who, but no one answered. John replied that he came from the west and he was looking for Master Gwaejgon. His husband asked him if he suddenly went to Master Sung Hwan. The young man made sure that his thoughts were correct. Then he replied that he was his teacher. Then the man understood what the young man was hiding behind his back and pointed with his hand with a smile. He asked the young man to follow him. he could lead him to the master. He is given special attention in Inha, so he stayed in the best house. The young man following his husband thought that then the teacher left with the Abo family so as not to meet the Bekri family again. He spoke so well then, but in reality he was running away from the elders and warriors of that family. He was in such a hurry that he didn't even tell the young man anything, but then he remembered how before his return the master had taken away the Abo family. And he took them to the foot of the mountain where the Inha guild then came there, and the head of the guild Shimgai Bayok Sword Inha, who came from the disciples of the Chanam clan, even the Bakri family would not dare to oppose him. But if they did not hasten to leave him and go, they were too imprudent. Meanwhile, the young man came to the right house. When the young man realized that they had come to that particular house, he could not understand why there were so many people in such a special house. When suddenly the young man heard a voice telling him to find him here again, he did not understand who it was. When he turned around, he realized that the teacher and his friend Abo were standing there. He asked if he was all right, but the teacher was standing happy and unharmed. And when he asked how his friend was feeling, he said with a smile on his face that everything was fine since he was strong. The loss of blood did not stop him. He started to ask the teacher what happened because from what he heard there was some incredible battle, but the teacher interrupted him and said that he was just lucky of Bekri in one short moment with one movement of his hand. But suddenly the teacher saw a woman and started talking to her, so I understood who she was. He introduced the young man to this woman as an elder, and she looked at him shocked, but the young man could not understand why the teacher so quickly changed the topic of conversation. The young man bowed to the woman's waist and introduced himself by name. The woman replied with a smile that she was very pleased to meet him, and the teacher called Abo's other younger brothers and sisters and wanted to introduce them to him. The first guy came up with two smaller children and introduced himself as Yun Bo. The young man introduced himself in response and mentally decided that he would ask the teacher about a topic that interested him a little later. But later, when the young man tried to ask the teacher something on this topic, the teacher somehow translated the topic and did not want to talk about it. The young man could not understand why the teacher did not want to tell about his actions. He was probably ashamed, but no one could know this because the more he knew about him, the less he knew. But as the teacher did not want to hide it, rumors spread very quickly. People looked at him and envied those who saw it live, and the old man who sold lids suddenly gained more respect. When they addressed him, he was very uncomfortable, and regardless of the contract, he decided to leave the guild. And the boy decided to ask the teacher a question that he was also interested in. It was one warm summer evening when the stars flaunted their beauty. Suddenly the young man decided to ask his teacher if he could not teach him possessions. Why? He asked why, so he decided to learn it quickly, but the young man replied that he just wanted to. Zhang then replied that it looked nice and started to show if he could look. But suddenly the teacher got very angry and started shouting at him that if he is learning martial arts just to look good. But suddenly the young man gave him a bag of gold, and the teacher's opinion immediately changed. He began to smile and said that he was a real treasure. Therefore later the young man asked again if he could now learn how to wield a sword. Instead, the teacher said with a smile that you need to be a little more loyal, giving advice with understanding and support. Then, with a serious expression on his face, he said that he would personally ask the mentor from Inha to take care of him. It was a clear sunny day when the conversation turned to martial arts and the representative of the temple began to talk about them. He said that he would do everything as Manju told him. The old man continued that there are many martial arts that are passed on to strangers in their Chanam faction, but he immediately warned that he would not be able to teach everything. The young man and his teacher stood in front of the representative and listened attentively. He said that he would still try to teach the young man what he would be satisfied with. The teacher and the young man thanked him by bowing at the waist. The old man said that it was the former student who should have come to teach him. He wanted to ask him for help, but the young man was shocked that he would be taught by a student and not the representative himself. But then the young man was pleasantly shocked and again thanked the representative for such an honor to teach him new martial arts. With a smile, the old man added that he shouldn't get his hopes up because, as he said before, he won't be able to learn all the Bonsan martial arts. He also said that the boy can only learn basic swordsmanship techniques. The young man agreed and then added that even though it was a base, it was still fencing techniques. How could he take it lightly? The young man stood with a smile, and the thought crossed his mind that he had never seen people who belonged to this martial art except Shimshbyak. He was very pleased that he was lucky enough to meet him, and in addition he would also learn guarding from him. That was simply incredible. But then the next picture that appeared in his prepayment shocked him. He saw a boy with white hair that was gathered in a high tail. He folded his arms and greeted him. His name was Myungi. He was from Cheongnam. The first thought that crossed the boy's mind was that he seemed very weak, but then he added that his name was simply Kwok Chun. Then John saw the clumsy gestures and the same facial expression. Instead, the young man smiled and agreed to call his student that. Then the master offered to show him the training hall in which all the young man's training will take place. When the boys started to leave, you go in the direction of the hall. Kwok Chun had one thought that did not give him peace. Would he really be able to learn the martial art of swordsmanship the right way from this young man? When they came to the hall, the master decided to show him the first techniques. They started with the easy one. But the young man was worried that everything would be fine with him, so he crossed his arms over his chest and watched him very carefully. The master suddenly exhaled air from his lungs and set himself to show the reception. Suddenly he swung and his sword cut through the air with a hiss. He was afraid gracefully like a fox. John was shocked because he did not expect such a perfect performance from his master. He stood and looked at him, unable to look away. The master moved as smoothly as a stream of water, which in the end converged to one smooth movement. When the master finished, he told what kind of technique it was. It was the well-known Chanam technique and a technique called the polar bear. That's how Chong started studying this technique, and he didn't understand how a year passed. The boys walked around the courtyard of their academy and talked about how quickly time had passed, that a whole year had already passed. The master said that he had already learned the polar bear technique and asked if this technique was really as good as he thought. Chong thanked his master and said that thanks to him, he was able to learn the most famous swordsmanship. He will always be grateful to his master for this. In response, he heard that the master was wondering how many days he could surrender. Then he added that as a result, the young man had been practicing constantly for a year and had taken these trainings very seriously, which pleasantly surprised him. Jung suddenly remembered his past teacher and said that the first thing he taught him was that you need to know the basics. Myung-hae completely agreed with him because his mentor and other teachers also always emphasized the importance of the basics. Then the master began to tell that there is one of the other masters who has a named sword, namely Master Sonam, but suddenly Kwok Jong understood which master he was talking about and supported the conversation, adding that he is the best swordsman in Jeonnam. With discomfort in his voice, the master replied that he was actually barefoot, known by this Master Sonam. So the master then emphasized once again that it is necessary to learn the basics, so their students study the basics for 3 months so that they can then start Bonsan. Then he said that the young man could go to the next step, and the young man in response asked what the next step would be. He heard that the instructor in Inha gave him permission to study Bonsan. When the teacher said that after the Big Dipper technique, he would learn celestial fencing, the young man was very shocked to hear. 6 months have already passed and the young man was still training with new techniques. Then he was near the waterfall on the green grass, not resting but training and training again. He quickly swung his sword up, raising it above his head. Then he brought the sword parallel to the ground and pointed it at an imaginary opponent. Then he exhaled the air from his lungs, and to endure the word, instead his master stood behind him and said that he had already learned almost everything. The boy, while putting the sword in its place, asked if he could use the heavenly technique in life, to which the master replied that of course he could. The master was very surprised and asked why the young man was asking him about this. In response, Chong began to tell that he had one person whom he really wanted to win in battle. The master asked if he really wanted to win, and then the next question gave Chan a little shock because the master asked who it was. After a short pause, the boy asked the master if he could keep it a secret, to which he replied that of course he could. Kwok Jong said with a serious face that the person was from the Baekri family. The master was very shocked, so at first he did not believe him. Later he asked if it was the same family member who was very precious. Jong confirmed this, but the master was a little too nervous and nervously scratched the back of his head. He then decided to ask if Kwaken didn't have enough skills to win. The youth's answer that as the master said earlier, he would have enough skills to overcome this person. Then the master asked in surprise why he had this, and the young man answered the following with a calm face. The young man said that Kwaken confuses him. Myonggi seemed surprised at what he heard. Then the master laughed and said that he would pass on the letter about the next nominee to the Baekri family, and the young man in turn of course agreed. Several days have passed. The young man could not find a city for himself. He was nervous every day. He constantly walked back and forth in the yard, unable to calm down. Then the master saw him and decided to ask if there was any news why the young man was silent at first. Then the young man broke the silence and answered that nothing came in response to his letter, and the master in turn was very surprised by this because 15 days had already passed since the letter was sent. So the woman decided that it was necessary to change the technique, but the master did not understand how to do it, so he asked him immediately. Chong replied with a mischievous smile that he had one rather interesting idea. It was an ordinary warm day when shouts and voices were heard outside the institution. Of course it was Lady Baekri, who did not want to sit on the first floor. While she was asked to go there, she was very angry about this fact. But the man began to make excuses because they had already paid for everything, they couldn't do anything. So he prayed that she would understand them, but she didn't seem to listen to him and shouted, asking if they were ignoring her or not. Suddenly she angrily passed by this man and ran to look for this man, asking, but she was stopped, but she did not listen. When she ran to the second floor, she screamed and asked what kind of moron could take her to the second floor. This guy was sitting and drinking tea without even paying attention. Instead she was screaming and asking if he wanted to die suddenly. Suddenly this guy turned to the girl and asked with a calm face if she sometimes called him a moron. Finally she was there. It was hard for him to imagine that he would ever be able to overcome this path. find a favorite institution and pay for the entire second floor, especially if thanks to this he could take revenge on her. All efforts would be justified. But suddenly when the girl saw him, she was shocked and her anger passed for a moment. The young man was very surprised by this reaction and the expression on their faces, so he asked her what happened. Then she apologized with a smile on her face and a soft silky voice and said that at that time she did not know that there was someone there, but the young man did not believe these words. He waved his head at her with a smile but thought in his mind that she was shameless because she thought that he didn't hear what a scandal she made. The young man stood up and said with a smile that he was embarrassed that he could have dinner with her, but he was kind of glad that everything was fine. She instead said that everything was fine. Then the girl added that how could she be angry with him? He was stunned by this picture and thought that she shouldn't be angry with him. Suddenly the young man had a brilliant idea. He decided to make it public. He asked if she came to eat there, why she agreed. Instead, the young man wanted to invite her to have dinner in the city with him. He stood next to her and pulling his hands invited her to sit at the table next to him and wanted to treat her to food, why she answered with a smile that he was obliged, but she still wanted to have dinner with him. He, like a real gentleman, sat the girl down at the table and said that he was there for the first time, so he did not know whether the food there was good or not. The girl replied with thanks, and all this was because he was looking for her. Everything that was done by the hands before was all in order to take revenge on her for everything she had done. The hours passed imperceptibly on the street where it was dark even more than before. The stars came out and the lights on the houses turned on. The candle was almost burnt out. The conversation could not end anyway, so the young man finished his story about why he travels around the world. So while he was dealing only with third-rate swordsmen, and he was actually upset by the fact that he still had not met a real master of martial arts who knew swordsmanship well. Instead, the girl was surprised because she thought he was more interested in science. Out of politeness, he laughed at her answer or thoughts. He could not understand why she kept changing the conversation in this direction, so he thought that maybe then it was the right time to change the topic of conversation to the one he needed. He did not know what to do, so he decided to do as he could, hoping for a lucky chance or spontaneity to get through this difficult situation. Then he asked her if she had ever heard of the turtle girl, why she was surprised, and asked if she had heard everything correctly. Then she realized who it was about and answered that of course she heard because she was very good at defense. At the age of 15 she fought robbers in the West in iron armor. But then she added that after that incident she was nowhere to be seen, so she asked if the young man suddenly knew where she was. He replied that of course he knew. She was very surprised by this and held her breath. Then he replied that actually the turtle girl was him who was sitting in front of her at that time. But the girl didn't believe him right away because she was a girl and he was a boy, so she decided to ask him if he was telling the truth. Answered which is true, but he was mistaken for a girl because he looked like that. In any case, he was at the event because it was part of his training. The young man continued that later he turned back because he had nothing to do in such beautiful cities as Gupalban or Changhashabad. He did not think that everything would be so sad without a faithful advisor. The girl said that she was very sorry to hear that because she could do anything she wanted. He said with deep sadness that he would like to see such a great power of a large family like Bekri if he had such a chance. He did not manage to finish how he was beaten by a girl. The girl with a smile told him to trust her. She could bring as many people as he wanted. She only asked him not to forget her kindness. The girl wanted to say something and her eyes were as big as the full moon, expressing her strong feelings and desire to convey her thoughts and emotions. But the young man did not let her finish and said that he knew that she pretended not to know what he really wanted to do, but the girl could not understand what he was talking about. Then the young man added that he wanted to see exactly her skill, but the girl did not understand what skill. Suddenly he took her hand. It surprised her very much. She did not know how to react to it. Then he added the question of whether it is possible to arrange it, namely to see her skill. The girl agreed and said with a smile on her face that first she needed to get her father's permission. The young man thanked her and realized in his mind that he had finally succeeded. But the girl decided to make the game more difficult because she offered to bet, but Chong did not understand what she was talking about at all. The girl answered with a smile that the one who loses must throw away the wish of the winner. Inconspicuously 3 days passed and finally the day of the battle came and everyone gathered to see it. Everyone who watched couldn't understand whether it was really a turtle girl. They argued because some said it was her, others said it wasn't her, but the Bekri family said it was her. The young man stood in the arena and looked away a little to the side to see how many people were gathered. He was shocked by the number of them. He thought that it must all be because of the turtle girl's name, but suddenly he saw familiar faces among the people who came. He saw how he was supported by his teacher and his friend A because he said that John should not be afraid of anything and do what he should. Then he also saw two familiar faces nearby. They were Sang Tanju and Tapio. They also told Du that he would win and wished him success. Then he also saw his master Myung Hai next to him, who also wished him luck, and said that he decided to take his friends from Jongnam with him. He said that at the very beginning there were few people, but when they found out that the turtle girl would participate there were a lot more people, but he assured him that he had nothing to worry about. He was also shocked that even the Chana masters came. He was happy and determined, so he clenched his fists and decided that he would go to the end so that it would not cost him. He stood and looked straight ahead and decided that it was necessary to finish this matter after all. Suddenly a red flag was raised there and everyone was asked for attention. Before moving on to the battle, the presenter wanted to give a word to the Bekri family, namely the master of the reverse wind sword. A family member promised one thing. The young man could not understand what he wanted to do or what he wanted to promise. The man with red hair, red eyebrows, mustache, and beard continues that he has heard a lot about the turtle that defeated the bad people in the western region. The young man began to worry, and the man continued that if he won that match, he promised everyone present on the stage in the arena that he would invite him to his house. The young man was very surprised but tried not to show it to others. He could not understand what was happening because they had not discussed it before. When he looked at the girl, he realized that this was exactly what she was asking him for so that they could stay together longer. But he agreed to any conditions if only to take revenge on her. That's all. His willingness to take on himself any risks and obligations testified to his deep feelings of resentment. Kwak Yung was very determined. He kept his concentration only on his opponent, so he decided to show who would beat whom. Second asked if they were ready. They stood facing each other, determined and focused on each other. They both confirmed that they were ready for this battle because each of them craved it in their own way. So in a moment, the leader, that is the runner-up, started the match. The audience greeted them with applause and shouts of good luck. When Chong got into a fighting position, he realized that he was very worried about the confrontation. Suddenly memories rushed into his head, and he could not understand why he was so worried. Maybe it was because of the blow. He remembered. He tried to calm himself down and decided that there was no need to be so nervous. The girl was standing in front of him and smilingly said that this was not a serious match, and the young man could not understand what had happened to her or that she might have underestimated him. So he decided to even ask if he could attack first, to which the girl replied of course he could. She didn't even have time to finish when the young man started swinging his sword directly at her with all his might. The girl was shocked by such a reaction and the seriousness of the match in general, and it struck her to the core, leaving her confused and insecure. But suddenly she managed to repel this blow because she had a very good reaction. He replied that she herself allowed him to attack in the first. They stood ready holding their swords. So in his mind he told her to get ready now because he knew that this time luck should be on his side. The fight was long and fierce. They fought no longer as a joke, and this match no longer seemed frivolous. He swung his sword and aimed at her, and she could dodge his sword with good grace and the same reaction, so at first he just wanted to win. But then he saw that he had angered his rival not in jest, and it made him think about his further actions and their further consequences. So then he realized that not everything is as simple as he thought at first, and this caused him to think again and revise his views on the situation. He did not have time to defend himself from her speed. Even his head was spinning. But suddenly she struck a very heavy blow and Kwak Yung bled. When she saw that he was bleeding, she got a little scared and asked if everything was fine with him. Her face really expressed fear. The young man was angry and at the same time shocked that she hadn't killed him yet. It was something he didn't want to think about. Did she really want him to survive that fight from the very beginning? Did she really believe in his strength and ability to overcome any challenges? But suddenly something happened that he could not have predicted, and it struck him to the core, causing unpleasant surprise and nervous tension. The girl began to give in to him, or maybe it seemed to him because he had more strength than then. This is exactly what he expected from her, so he decided to act as he had planned earlier. Suddenly he did something that shocked the audience. They did not understand what was happening. Their faces showed shock in the best light. His rival became even more angry when she saw that he took out a cover from under his clothes. Holding the lid in one hand, he said that he was the 28th student who succeeded in achieving the art of Kwajmug. In a moment, the young man was already holding two lids, one for each, and with a smile on his face, he introduced himself as Kwak John. But in his mind, he realized that he really didn't want to use it. He was even ashamed of it. The girl, with rage in her voice and face, asked if it was really a cauldron lid as a weapon, if he had actually learned the art of Kwajmun. The young man confirmed this, and in a moment the girl understood why he was nicknamed the Turtle. Focusing on him, the girl asked if he was sure that he would not regret it, why he replied that she should. Raising the sword up, the girl said that it will be seen whether he will tell about it in her house. Aiming the sword directly at him, she called him to draw his attention only to her. Suddenly the girl spun around so that a clear silhouette was no longer visible. She was beautiful like the eighth wonder of the world, and at the same time deadly like a tsunami. Then Chong realized that she was exactly what he expected from her from the very beginning. The moment she aimed her sword at him, she was a centimeter away from him. She told him that this was the end. But young man, look at your lids, you didn't think so. In one moment, when the audience did not even have time to blink, the young man placed his shield under her sword, due to which a loud and resounding sound came out. The girl flew away so quickly and strongly that she did not understand it herself, and this impression remained in her memory. But she managed to land on her feet and not fall on her back. She looked at her opponent from under her forehead and was incredibly furious with him. But suddenly she noticed that her hands began to shake, and she did not understand what the problem was and why this happened. She quickly looked up at him and asked how this happened because this had never happened to her. She was shocked by this. The young man with a smile stood in front of her holding the lid in one hand and said that it was not all of Kwajmin's capabilities yet. The girl immediately told him not to be so arrogant and rushed at him with her attack. Finally, it happened. The young man had been waiting for this since the very beginning of the battle, so he prepared with all his might. The bitter struggle between them lasted quite a long time. Then the young man remembered his teacher, or rather his words, when he said that Bantan is the most important attack in Kwaken, because it absorbs your opponent's energy and returns it in the opposite direction. But at that time Kwak Jong did not lose his energy, but on the contrary gained it even more. His teacher and friend Ebo watched them very carefully, during which the teacher realized that the young man finally understood everything correctly. But a member of the Bekri family was standing and also watching the battle. He couldn't believe that that attack was able to knock her down. Jayong Bekri couldn't believe that such a thing was even possible because she was the best in battles and had defeated that young man several times, but probably not the last time. The young man didn't seem tired at all because he looked very alive, so he immediately asked if she would like to finish it. Instead, it angered the girl twice as much, and the fact that the young man was smiling at her rather than lying on the floor dying of pain added fuel to the fire. Suddenly, quite unexpectedly, she noticed that Kwak Chan's iron cap was flying in her direction. But thanks to her good reaction, she managed to knock back his iron cover with her sword in time. Then she stood with a slightly beaten face and glared at Kwak Chong. But suddenly, when the girl did not have time to catch her breath, she heard a threat that he was already approaching, and she no longer saw that young man in front of her. But suddenly, unexpectedly, a member of the Bekri family shouted at the top of his voice for them to stop fighting because he saw that his close family could die right before his eyes. But no one had time to do anything because the young man had already done it on his own, impressing everyone with his decisive action. The lid hit that girl so hard that she began to bleed, and this caused serious concern for everyone who was nearby. She flew a few meters away from him and fell with a loud sound on the arena where the battle was taking place. Then the young man realized that it was his victory. He finally did it. His training was not in vain. The girl was lying on the floor and did not move. It seemed that she was not breathing at all, which caused panic among all those present. Out of happiness, the young man raised both hands in which he held the lids and shouted with joy in his voice. The second announced that the girl was a turtle and then corrected himself, that is, the turtle Sohyop won the lid from the cauldron, won the sword of the Bekri family. The audience shouted and greeted him with a standing ovation. The young man was very happy with his victory because he had been waiting for it for so long, and this moment became for him the most important in his life. But then he noticed something in front of him that slightly changed his mood, and it made him think about his actions and future plans. He, and not only him, noticed that the atmosphere had changed dramatically and the security of the Bekri family was already standing in front of him at that time. The father took his daughter in his arms and saw that his precious child was lying unconscious in his arms. Suddenly he saw another member of the Bekri family who was beside himself with his rage. He asked Chong how he dared to do such a thing to her. But suddenly his face became disfigured, which was also reflected in his voice. Then the man took a quick dispersal to run to John to take revenge for Jayana Bakery. The young man was shocked by what began to happen. He realized that the end had surely come for him. Suddenly the dust rose so high that no one was visible. It was so thick that it seemed that it was not just dust, but the earth rose into the air. The audience was so shocked by what was happening before their eyes that some began to scream in fear. John managed to cover his face and close his eyes, but he remained on his feet. Opening his eyes, he couldn't believe what he saw in front of him was something that went beyond all limits. His teacher ran into the arena to save his student's life. He held the lid and did not let the sword come through the bones and muscles of Kwak Chong. The fight started again, and it was more fierce than the last one. The men looked at each other, and none of them wanted to give in because it meant losing their lives. But in the end, a member of the Bekri family put away his sword, unable to withstand the tension from the teacher's iron cap. The teacher then got into a battle stance that promised no mercy for them and said that it was a Kwaken attack called the 20 Devouring Pagodas. Then they raised the red flag to the sky again and demanded to start the resonance again. The young man stood, to put it mildly, surprised. He didn't know what to do, and his confusion was evident in his look and gestures. After all, they and the teacher were surrounded by the entire guard of the Bekri family, creating an even more hostile atmosphere because at that moment someone had to die. The man then realized that it was he who was Master Kwajmun, so he looked at him more carefully. He said that in the past he hurt his daughter, and then his student did the same. He was happier than ever that he finally appeared in the city and did not start hiding like a rat again. So he decided to repay both of them twice as hard for what he had done earlier. The man began to burn as if with a red flame and chose teacher instead with a bright yellow one, and in his answer he said that he should try to harm them. But suddenly the man did not understand what they were doing, the teacher of the handsome Sayan. But all three of them were unable to understand what he said, so they froze with strange expressions and tried to understand him. Suddenly Jung noticed that Abo had also come and was pleasantly surprised that he was also there. He was standing next to him and was ready to protect his friend. Suddenly the man ordered his guards to tie the three of them, and if they resisted it was ordered to kill all of them. The men of course were going to start resisting. They were all standing in a fighting position because they were definitely not ready to surrender just like that. The young man mentally understood that if he was simply killed then it would be fine, but the teacher and his friend A were standing nearby. Although he did not love him very much, he definitely did not want to die. But suddenly everyone heard the order to stop immediately. Three men arrived who were dressed alike, and it turned out that they were not just passers-by, they were followers of Chanam. Chanam's followers were doing there, then it would definitely be difficult for them. The men were happy to welcome them and bowed at the waist as a sign of politeness, but in response they heard fierce cries for them to get out of there. But suddenly a member of the Bekri family started yelling at them that it was just their problems and Chanam shouldn't interfere in their affairs. But the head of the Bekri family did not even want to hear other words from them. The man opposite him began to say that it was a fair fight. The head of the family began to shout that how could he say such a thing without knowing anything about their relationship with Quaxman. He continued that given the good reputation Chanam, he wanted to talk to them in a good way. How could he even speak so brazenly to the head of the Bekri family? So then he asked if this is what he was taught in Chanam. The young man hid the sword in silence, but then added that nothing could be done there. But suddenly the people of Chanam all drew their swords and were ready to fight because the fight was fair and Kwak Jong won. One of them said that they were all now ready to fight. Quackamug, the man in blue, stood and confidently held his sword in front of him, aiming at Bekri's family and servants. When Kwak Jong turned his head to the right, he saw his master Myung Hai standing next to him and showing the class that he had done his job perfectly. But suddenly Kwak Jung realized that they were all doing it for his own sake, and suddenly the thought that he was not worthy of this came to him and his face changed accordingly. But suddenly Jayan Ah Bakery's father didn't like it. Because no one had the right to contradict him, he was very surprised by this. The man ordered the followers of Chanam not to kill but to capture only the other three. His servant and bodyguard bowed to his master and said that he would carry out all the orders of the master to the Hyanams. But suddenly other people entered the arena and decided to protect this young man and his friends as a teacher. It was a girl and a boy who were dressed in expensive clothes. They said that they also could not stay away. Then it turned out that they were followers of the Great Wasan. Suddenly Master Myinghak greeted Sun Young Huna and Mrs. Wyariagan smiled back and said that they were glad to see each other because they had not seen each other for a long time. But this angered the main member of the Bekri family even more. His anger clearly showed on his face. At that time Kwak Jong and his teacher were very surprised by such a noble act of these followers. Instead they introduced themselves that their names are Sunyong and Wiryogun, and that they are followers of Wasan, and that they are ready and will follow them. Then they folded their hands and bowed at the waist to show all their respect for them. Kwak Jong was so surprised that he almost didn't manage to react to it in any way. His only thought was that Wiryogun was standing in front of him, who wields the sword of Nerite Blooming Plum. He was very grateful to fate that this happened. But when he looked at the girl, he realized that she had a beautiful appearance. The girl had big blue eyes, black hair that reached her waist, and clean snow-white skin that seemed to shine under the sun's rays. Kwak Jung was a little embarrassed and blushed instead, and a bow behind him was also surprised by the unparalleled beauty of the girl standing in front of them. But suddenly they heard how many voices shouted the same thing in one voice, that they were also joining them. These were the people, the spectators who came to watch the fight at the very beginning. The young man was ready to cry out of gratitude that he could not express in words to all those who decided to support him and not let him die at the hands of the head of the Bekri family, and that's when he understood what Murim really meant. When he looked around he saw and realized that even Tisehian came to support him, and even Seongli and Mukwan was so nice to him that all those people were ready to put their lives at risk just to help him in the battle. While Kwak Jong was surprised by all those who decided to support him, the head of the bakery family, namely Hyanim, the father of the same Hyana bakery, called the elder to him. He came to him and bowed, showing that he was fully ready to listen to him. He ordered to capture the followers of Wasan and Jongnam. No one could believe it, but he decided to do exactly that. It seemed to him that it was the most correct decision at that moment. Instead, everyone who stood in front of him held their breath and waited for what he would say next, but they were already ready to fight and put their lives in danger, but to protect their honor and the honor of the one who honestly won the battle. But suddenly he ordered everyone else to just kill them. The guy was very surprised but very angry when he heard that, so he thought that the man must have lost his mind, because how did he even dare to touch the students of such academies as Wasan or Chanam, but especially Wasan, who respected them very much. And the Bekri family still remained in front of them. In the end, a lot of people could die because of someone's rage. He did not want to allow that. But then he calmed down and decided that nothing could be done, so his face began to look completely calm. Instead, he ordered the heads of the family to seize the others, but another voice managed to interrupt him in time. The young man came out to him with a lid in his hand and said that since he brewed all this, the issue should be resolved with him and no one else, because others are not to blame for this. But instead, the head of the family became even more angry because he thought that he had orders from a young man whom he had seen for the first time. Suddenly, unexpectedly, he cut off the young man's hand. Everyone was shocked by what they saw. No one knew what to do because because they were caught off guard. Suddenly his friend and his teacher began to take him very seriously. They shouted to the whole playground so that everyone heard it. It seemed that even the neighboring towns who lived nearby heard it. The young man was holding on to the shoulder of a hand that was no longer there, and the head of the family was standing in front of him and looking him straight in the eyes with a hideous smile. They stood looking at each other, and neither of them tried to back away. But suddenly he told everyone to gather and go. His advisor and all his servants, including the guard, namely the one who remained alive. When they decided that they were going to go back, the flags flew to show that they were going to go. But suddenly the young man felt sick. The picture before his eyes began to blur and his eyes began to close. Unnoticeably, he fell to the floor, not understanding what had happened. Everyone ran to him and tried to help. Someone shouted that the bleeding should be stopped. Another said that he would help. 5 months have passed, and it was an ordinary summer day. The sun was shining in all its glory. He sat on a wooden stump and looked at the scenery that opened before him. The thought that first came to him was that despite the fact that he had no hands, he could learn something new. Even in such a situation, he was able to find advantages. The first one of the advantages was that, for example, even for short-term fame, you need to bear a certain responsibility. What kind of responsibility it will be, no one can know in advance. Then he exhaled hard from his lungs and realized that there was someone near him who asked why he was so upset. When he returned to where the voice was coming from, he saw that it was the teacher. He asked if he had lost his confidence just because he lost his hand. The young man, of course, denied that this was of course not true, but the teacher sat down next to him and asked what happened just then. The young man did not know whether to tell or not, but then he broke the silence with his voice. Suddenly he smiled and blushed and said that he was thinking about Ms. Wee all the time. Suddenly the teacher was shocked by such an answer because he definitely did not expect such a thing, and asked about which lady he was talking about. Maybe it was Wiryogun from Wasan. He certainly did not know the exact answer. Wiryogun, who wields the sword of Narite Blooming Plum. She was not a direct descendant of Jaekyeongjin, who was also popular as Lee So-wool of a myth. He and Kwak Yung were the same age. Then the young man continued that he thought about her all the time because there was one detail that he couldn't get out of his head. She constantly took care of him. She was perfect in everything from her martial arts skills to her appearance. The way Mrs. Wei took care of him, he was very grateful to her for that, for not leaving him even though she shouldn't have done that, but she took care of him. Meanwhile, the teacher sat and listened to Chung in silence. Then the teacher broke the silence. He said that it was a complete horror. He did not want to sit next to the pervert. Then he got up and decided to leave, saying that he thought Jung would be in despair after what happened. He couldn't believe what he heard. Instead, the young man just smiled at him and decided not to say anything because he had said everything he wanted before, and the important day was approaching, namely the day when he would need to get the lamp. Suddenly, the teacher was distracted from his work by his student who was standing next to him and was going to go somewhere for a month. The teacher was very surprised because not so long ago he lost his arm. He asked where you went with such a body, but he did not answer exactly but said that in one place. But the young man replied with a smile that he was feeling well. He was trying to make sure that the teacher didn't worry about him anymore. The young man took the teacher by the shoulder and they decided to move away from the place where the teacher worked. Then he agreed with Kwak Yung. The teacher could not help but worry about his student because he became like a family member, so he asked to be very careful. The city of Wongincheon people strolled along the narrow cobblestone street, decorated with lanterns, some carrying baskets and jugs, others selling goods from stalls. The warm atmosphere of the sunset prevailed. The young man came to this place quite quickly, and with a slight smile on his face decided to walk through the streets of this warm sunny evening. But then the young man realized that he was back at the place where it all started, so sadness fell on his shoulders. But suddenly he realized that the more he would be able to meet the genie again and remember his 3 wishes, anything he could want, and he already knew what he wanted. Suddenly the young man looked away and realized that he was already there waiting for him. He noticed a lamp that gave reflections from its golden coating, thus attracting the attention of all who passed by. Suddenly they found themselves back in that cave, a cold, gray, and damp cave. When the young man said that he wanted to have gin, he was shocked because the young man wished to have a lid from the boiler. He decided to ask him again, but the young man confirmed that this is exactly what he wanted. Jean was so shocked that he said he lived for more than 1,000 years. He met hundreds of people all over the planet. He fulfilled more than 1,000 wishes, but for the first time he heard about the wish to get a lid from the cauldron. Kwak Yung decided to ask him if he heard exactly what he said. Then the genie said that surely there were a lot of scary monsters in Murima. The boy calmly confirmed that fact. Then the young man repeated his wish. He wanted to fight with strong masters, so he needed a boiler cover that would never break under any circumstances. He needed not just a cauldron lid, but the strongest lid in the world, thanks to which he could freely use the martial arts, especially Kwaken, which he learned. Suddenly Jean thought, rubbing his kind of beard. Jean started to let go because he had heard the story before about the spear that could pierce any shield, and also about the shield that no spear could pass through itself. The young man said with a smile on his face that he understood what you were talking about, especially the contradictions of Han Fei Zi. They remembered this contradiction, and the genie decided to ask if the young man knew who was the one who traded in shields and spears, to which the young man answered with a question asking who he was because he used to think that he was just an ordinary trader. But the genie, with a smile that showed all his white teeth, said that he was not just an ordinary merchant. The genie began to tell that he was a blacksmith. The boy decided to ask if he made this spear and shield himself, why the genie replied that he made it himself and he was a high-class blacksmith with a very good level of skill who specialized only in spears and shields. Then over time this blacksmith himself decided to conduct a small experiment. He tried not to break the spear against the shields or the shield against the spear, but in the end all the tips for the spear were broken as were the shields. But later that master understood everything. If he continued to improve those two items, he could get a spear that would be able to pierce any shield and another shield that could not be pierced by any spear. The young man replied that there was a certain meaning in that. More than 100 years past the work of this blacksmith continued. His descendants split into two camps. Some made spears and others made shields. Then some of the descendants who made shields went west to find good materials for making further shields. When many years passed, they finally managed to make the best shield. It was all thanks to very painstaking work. The young man was very surprised by this story. Then these rumors about an impenetrable shield reached the ears of God himself, and in the end the god of thunder himself came to visit this blacksmith. The young man was so shocked by these stories that he decided to ask if it was really the god of thunder. Jim confirmed that this is exactly how he was the god of thunder. He was quite a mischievous god, so he decided to offer the blacksmith a bet. The condition was that if the hammer of thunder could not break the shield in 3 blows, he would then be able to fulfill any wish of that blacksmith. The young man listened so attentively and vividly imagined this story that he was very interested in how it ended, so he decided to ask Jean. In the end, the shield did not break. Then the god of thunder admitted his defeat and, as promised, ordered the blacksmith to make any wish. However, the blacksmith asked that his shields be sealed, all 30 of his shields. Instead, the young man was very surprised that he did exactly 30 and not one. Then he decided to ask why he ordered to seal them. John replied that he did it because he knew the power of his shield better than anyone else, and that was what scared him. It is not known how it could all end if such a shield fell into the hands of the wrong people, so the god of thunder gave the blacksmith a bracelet on his arm in which his shields were sealed. Then the genie added that however the bracelet, which was a gift from the god of thunder, contained the energy of thunder, until the shields that had been inside the bracelet for hundreds of years absorbed the divine power and became much stronger than they were before. Then the genie decided to ask if the young man liked the story. The young man decided to ask the bracelet and the shields were sealed, why the genie did not understand what had happened to him. He wanted to be sure to ask that his lid be sealed as well, but he realized that in the end he wouldn't be able to use the shield and asked if he understood correctly. But meanwhile he realized in his mind that if it was possible the conditions would be extremely difficult. He didn't want to fall for that anymore. But Jean replied that it was not like that. Everything is not wrong, as he thinks. The young man was shocked by this. Jean even pulled him out of his thoughts. But then the young man asked with a smile if there were any limits, but the genie answered that there were none. If he made a wish, he would immediately give him a bracelet with the best shield in the world, in which the energy of the god of thunder would be sealed. The young man did not believe this at first, so he just laughed in response. He continued to laugh and said that he understood because they were trying to trick him again. He then decided to ask the genie if it would be possible to retrieve the shields from the sealed bracelet, to which the genie replied that they could be retrieved. Jean said that it was necessary to just shout one phrase, namely a thunder shield, and then it would automatically appear in any part of his body. The young man froze and did not even breathe because he was so surprised by this information. Jean confirmed that it was all true, so he asked with a smile if he wanted to use his first wish now. In one moment, a golden bracelet appeared on the young man's hand, which shone like the sun setting over the horizon. The guy was very surprised that he now has a bracelet of the god of thunder on his hand, why the genie replied that he is big and strong, he can do anything if it is within his conditions. The genie never lied, but the young man asked if it was possible to touch what belonged to God. Jinsi laughed and said that the young man was actually very knowledgeable, so it was true if he wasn't a great genie, he would still never be able to reach for the property and kingdom of the gods. The young man was so fascinated by his bracelet that he no longer listened to the genie, but he said with a smile that he needed to listen to the story until the end, so the god of thunder gave that bracelet to the blacksmith. That is, the bracelet belonged to a blacksmith who was a man and not by God. It was also possible to survive the shield only on the ground because it was necessary to play it safe, because the shield was very strong and for the first time it might take a lot of strength to summon it. Suddenly the young man gained strength and drew more air into his lungs, pulling himself together. Then with this power he shouted the phrase thunder shield, raising his hand above his head. The bracelet shone with a blue glow that illuminated the entire cave. Suddenly the bracelet began to shine brighter and brighter, that the young man was no longer visible, only his silhouette was visible. In one short moment there were many shields on the floor that were charged with thunder. The young man was standing next to him and was very surprised by this. The young man was very pleasantly surprised, but the genie replied that everything he saw was only a small part of all the power that those shields have. If he put on a shield, real madness would begin. The young man laughed and agreed with him. Jean took one shield and held it to the young man's hand and told him to try to use the one that had the least amount of thunder energy. The young man of course agreed. When the young man took it in his hands, he sowed it with sparks like the sky when thunder rolls. But suddenly the young man realized that the thunder spread not only through his body. The young man even had smoke coming out of his hair. Then the genie began to worry a little, so he asked if everything was fine with him, and the young man replied with a smile that everything was fine. Gina stood and looked at the shields and said that it was the weakest shield, almost not charged with thunder. At that moment the young man realized that he was probably too weak, so he could not use the thunder shield. He couldn't do anything about it, so he decided to seal those shields back into the bracelet. Suddenly all the shields were back in golden bracelets. He thanked his genie again. Then the genie noticed that the young man wanted to ask him something else. The young man wanted to ask for one more thing, namely, he wanted to make a second wish. Jean managed to guess that it would probably be another shield. Suddenly the young man confirmed that it was so, but he needed another shield. The genie asked if that was all or if he wanted something else. So the young man wanted to add to his wish. Then he realized that in any case the second wishes will come with conditions, so it is better to first make the wish that suits him the most. The young man wanted to think about others when he returned to the past again, so I decided to ask the genie if he could already use a thunder shield. If not, then he needed a shield that he could use right at that moment, which was very strong. Jean asked for 1 minute so he could think. He actually thought a lot about what it could be. Then the genie made a projection of all the shields and offered the young man to choose the one he liked the most. The young man was not surprised, so he did not know what to choose from. After thinking for a few minutes, the young man again apologized to the genie and asked if he had anything similar to a boiler lid. The young man looked at him in surprise and decided to ask again if he had heard correctly. That's how he said it seemed to him that he could only use Kwajmyeon if he used something he was already familiar with. Then Jean thought and asked him to wait for 1 minute. In a moment he showed the lid from the cauldron, which was used by as many as 12 generations who were engaged in Kwakchman. Immediately appeared in Kwakchan. It was the very lid that was mixed with 1,000-year-old wisdom. Then the 12th generation thought that Kwajmyeon was a real holy phenomenon. The young man replied that he wanted to make a wish. The boy said that he wanted all the shields that he had shown him before and the lid of the cauldron that he had just shown. It was his second wish. The genie agreed with everything that was said. But suddenly something happened that he could not fulfill his wish. The young man could not understand what was the matter because he was a great sorcerer. But the genie joked, and with one movement of his fingers, he fulfilled the young man's wish. Suddenly a mountain of shields appeared in front of them, which was almost impossible to grasp with the eye. Jean asked with a smile if he liked what the young man replied that his gene was the best. Then the young man decided to move on to the third wish, but the genie was shocked that he could immediately remember the third wish. With a smile on his face, the young man wished that he would return him a month back, that is to the past. In a moment the young man found himself in the past, the bracelet on his arm, and remained nowhere. Later he met the genie again and decided to use his 3 wishes to find out what it took to become a master. He asked the genie to make him the master of Murim, and that's what he needed, help with his power. No matter how many times he came back, he didn't know how long it could take. He asked Jean to go to the 1,000-year-old ginseng mountain in a city called Baek-Tuzan Mountain in Goryeo, but Jean asked him to wait. The boy was interested to know what was the limit of the genie who gave him the thunder shield. He was interested to know it sooner. Suddenly the genie returned to his master, thereby scaring him. He understood that something was wrong with the jinn. He replied that he could not and apologized to his master. He was sorry, of course, but the young man already knew that it would be so. He knew what wish he craved the most, the last wish he had left. He would only need this. He started to plan his wish correctly. Maybe he needed Madampa or Techongdan, and maybe even the divine power of Tejik and Yanga. Suddenly Jean stopped him and said that there was too much power needed. Then John decided to offer Magio, or for example Jianma's divine power. There was also a lot of elixir, but Jean stopped the young man again because that magic was unavailable. But the young man didn't seem to hear him and continued to list the others, but Jean suddenly stopped him for good. Suddenly he knelt before his master and begged his forgiveness. But the young man suddenly said that he was asking too much, for which he had to apologize to him, of course for no reason, so he asked to get up. Instead the genie only silently bowed his head to him. Suddenly Jean stood up and said that the thing was that he could not tell much. There was God and his assistants who helped God himself, and he was one of them. Zhang could not believe what he heard. The genie began to tell that usually they helped God in the divine world, but there were those who went to earth. As usual they were of the celestial type, but the genie denied and said that they were those who were born by themselves in the human world, and he was talking about others. Jean was talking about the spirits. Chong was surprised that it was them. The genie confirmed that these were spirits such as the spirit of the earth, the spirit of the forest, the spirit of the soil, the spirit of fire, and so on. There were many types and a large number of them. And the spirits about which the young man asked lived in the land, which were guarded by the same spirits. Those spirits were on the same level as himself. So it was very difficult to get something that was lying in the city that they guarded. The young man decided to suggest a Shaolin or Donpa or Magio temple, but the genie said that those were cities in which the divine power was due to ordinary greatness, so it would be much more difficult. Even if the power of the gods was small, there is a city where the power is made by the people themselves as much as possible. For example, such cities as the 12th generation or the imperial palaces of the 12th generation had great power which had been accumulated until then, and the imperial palaces had power only thanks to the existence of the emperor himself, and cities in which there were too many demons and devils were also difficult, but the genie noted that they were not like ghosts. The problem was that when a person solved a problem with a diabolical intention that people could not have at that moment, they had a different power. Then the genie bowed his head and said that all this should have been explained from the very beginning and apologized to his master for not telling him about it right away and giving him hope, but Chong said with a smile that it was a trifle. John said that meeting him was a real luck in his life. He was grateful just because it had already happened, so he wanted to make a big bow to him. Jean burst into tears at these words and said that he was very grateful that he thought so instead of choosing to mention another wish. The next time the genie said that he would do his best, Chong started to speak for the cave, but the genie didn't understand and thought that he wanted even more treasures in this cave. But the boy denied that it was not about the treasures. He needed to arrive in that cave for more than a year or two, or the shortest is 15 days. Jean thought that he wanted to make something like a house in that cave. The young man wanted to arrange a cave so that he could live there and possibly train. Jean decided to ask him what he wanted more specifically. To begin with, there had to be enough space and it had to be strong. It had to be so much space that one round of running around the cave took a long time. It had to be so strong that the cave did not move away from the city during an earthquake. Then the boy added that he would also like to have spring water that would never dry up. Ideally, it should be healing water that was good for the body. Jean agreed and said that he would make a spring that would help him learn martial arts, calm the body, and cleanse the body. Zhang then asked if it would be nice if the house was surrounded by beautiful green grass and trees, to which the genie replied that he had already thought about it. The young man was surprised that he had already managed to think about it, but the genie decided to ask if he meant the trees that would give him divine power. Jung thought that he guessed. Then Jean confirmed and said that he was just ashamed of what happened recently. But Jean warned that it would not be possible to receive a large amount of divine power at one time. Then the young man asked if he could make daylight come through the opening above them. The genie replied that he would calculate and make the opening even bigger so that the most daylight would enter the cave, but the young man did not want people to come through that opening, so he offered to cover it a little trees. John said that it was a great idea, so he offered to do it right then and there. The young man did not object. Suddenly the magic from Jin's hands spread throughout the cave. The young man watched in surprise. One short moment passed and his dream was already in front of him. The sun's rays broke through the thick leaves of the trees, illuminating his new house with wooden walls and a tiled roof surrounded by thick green grass and flowers, creating an atmosphere of peace and harmony. He even had a small pond in which lotuses bloomed and large red fish swam. When the genie asked how he was doing, the young man didn't know what to say. He couldn't take his eyes off his new home. It was a real paradise on earth. It looked like the house of an ancient god. The young man was so happy that he could not hold himself in place, and he thanked Jean, to which he replied that he was very happy that his master liked everything. But suddenly the young man wanted to ask him for something else. Could not the quality of his second wish set his hand? Of course he could do it, so with one movement of his hand the wish was fulfilled. Suddenly the young man felt his other hand, and this sensation even surprised him. The young man was even more pleased, and the genie said that his master's mood had lifted him up. Then the young man said that with such a good mood it's time to come to his next wish, to his third wish. Jean in turn was surprised that he already knew what he wanted. The young man with a confident expression on his face said that he already knew what he needed at that very moment. He wished to go back to the past, namely a month ago.